She needs a mic.
And as she's getting ready, I will just say, if you're going to speak, you'll need to turn your mic on by pulling the lever towards you when you're ready to speak. And please don't forget to push it away to turn it off, because these are live mics. And again, the meeting is live and it's being recorded.
Madam Chair,
Present.
Greg Endek,
Present.
Lori Barnhart, Gray Blunt,
I'm sorry, Laurie Barnhart's present. I couldn't get off mute.
Okay.
Gray Blunt, Ben Calhoun,
Present.
Christopher Chung, Brian Clark, Phyllis Craig Taylor,
Present.
Kevin Dick, Hayes Frame, Secretary Walter Gaston,
Present.
Christine Goebel,
Present.
David Goss, Susie Hamilton,
Present.
Harry Harker,
Present.
Stephen Callan, David Kelly,
Present.
Kevin Lackley,
Present.
Gear Martin,
Present.
Jamie Simmons,
Present.
Glenn Skinner,
Present.
Justin Sinise,
Sazi, present. Present. Okay.
Whit Tuttle, present. Okay. That is roll call, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Nicole. North Carolina open meeting laws requires that an ethics statement be read at the start of every meeting. In accordance with the State Government Ethics Act, it is the duty of every task force member to avoid both conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts. If any member has any known conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to matters coming before the task force today, please be with us here in person. She did have a little bit of an accident. Maybe she'll tell you about that. But she is joining us virtually. Secretary Sanders.
Good morning to all. It was breaking up on sound, so hopefully it's not on my end and break up. Thank you all for being here today to serve on the North Carolina Taskforce for Offshore Wind Economic Resource Strategies and to begin this important work on behalf of North Carolina. I would love to have been there with you. Unfortunately, I sprained my ankle or my foot trying to get some exercise in and had to slow down for a minute. So I will be with you hopefully next time, but I'm glad to join you virtually. I want to take some time to thank some people and then move along because I know the program is packed for today. I want to thank my designee Chief of Staff, Marquita Welton, for serving as the task force chairperson for the team. And her team has been working hard to pull all this together. So thank you for that. I'd also like to take a brief moment to formally welcome our new Assistant Secretary of Clean Energy Economic Development, Jennifer Mont.
I'm sorry, Secretary. I'm sorry, you were cut off. If you don't mind starting again, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Can you guys hear me okay now?
We do.
Okay. Good morning to everyone, and thank you all for being here today to serve on the North Carolina Taskforce for Offshore Wind Economic Resource Strategies and to begin this important work. As I mentioned, I am apologizing to you that I am unable to be there. I sprained my ankle yesterday, unfortunately, trying to get some exercise in and just having to slow down for a minute, but I'm pleased to join you virtually. I want to thank Marquita Welton, our Chief of Staff, who I have designated as chairperson of the task force, and thank her team for pulling all of this together. I would also like to take a brief moment to formally welcome our new Assistant Secretary of Clean Energy Economic Development, Jennifer Mont. Jennifer brings many years of specialized knowledge and experience to this new endeavor, which will bring tremendous insight and value to North Carolina's offshore wind energy efforts. Prior to joining Commerce, Jennifer worked side by side with John Hardin, our Executive Director of the Office of Science, Technology, and Innovation, and Jeremy Tarr, the Governor's Senior Advisor for Climate Change Policy, in leading the state's efforts in offshore wind energy. And I know that Mary Jo Alcott, who's there with you, who serves as the Governor's Deputy Director for Intergovernmental Affairs in the eastern part of the state, will be working closely with them on some issues as well. I would also like to thank Dion Delegati for being there with you and being a part of this. Her continued extraordinary leadership and partnership and collaboration as North Carolina's Clean Energy Director will be vital to helping us advance the work we will do. Governor Cooper and his administration has prioritized a cleaner, greener, and more sustainable North Carolina. And advancing the offshore wind energy industry is a big part of that effort. The offshore wind energy is expected to create $140 billion of supply chain and tens of thousands of new jobs within the eastern United States by 2035. And North Carolina stands well positioned to attract a significant portion of more than $100 billion market opportunity from the growing offshore wind energy industry. According to a report that was released by our department in last March, which hopefully you've had the opportunity to see. That means good jobs and economic growth for our eastern communities and states for many generations to come. That also means a cleaner, greener, and better environment for each of us and for generations to come. And we need your expertise, your ideas, your focus, your advocacy, and your intellect to help bring all of this to fruition. We have a lot planned today for a short time here today, and I'm not going to steal all the thunder from others who will be talking more in depth about our unique opportunities in the state and the specific work that you'll be doing during today's meeting and beyond. Now, we are fortunate to have a leadership who cares deeply. We're fortunate to have Governor Cooper's leadership. He cares deeply about our people, the environment, economy, and the future of our state and our nation for years to come. Because of his visionary leadership and his action-oriented leadership, we are here today advancing North Carolina's economic and clean energy agenda and future for offshore wind. And so on that note, I am pleased to welcome Governor Roy Cooper. Governor Cooper.
Well, thank you, Madam Secretary, for that introduction, and I hope you heal quickly. Madam Chair, thank you for your leadership in bringing this august group together. Glad to be here also with our Secretary of Military and Veterans Affairs, Walter Gaskin. Thank you for being here. My Clean Energy Director, Dion Delegati, and my Senior Policy Advisor, Jeremy Tarr. Greer Martin also is on this, representative chair of our Military Affairs Committee. As mentioned, Mary Jo Alcock is our Intergovernmental Affairs for Eastern North Carolina. And I think I know most everybody on this task force today who are coming at this issue in so many different ways. And I am so excited to be here. Why clean energy? It is essential to fighting climate change. We know that. We know particularly the coast has experienced the more severe storms that have occurred. But it's also essential because it's going to put money in people's pockets. Already, more than 100,000 clean energy jobs and billions of dollars of investment have occurred in North Carolina. And companies are coming here because they know we're on the cutting edge of the clean energy economy. Witness just the past couple of weeks, Toyota is going to make its electric vehicle batteries here. Boom Supersonic is going to build planes that fly twice as fast with zero carbon emissions. Companies like Apple, like Biogen, like Fujifilm Diosynth, they want a zero carbon footprint. And when they come to North Carolina, that's what they expect. We're already in the top 5 states in the country in solar installed capacity. Clean energy is the right thing for our planet and our pocketbooks. So here's where we are, and here's what's happened over the last few years. I signed EO 80, Executive Order 80, in 2018, which led to the bipartisan House Bill 951 that says we're going to get to a 70% reduction in carbon over 2005 levels by 2030. And we're going to get to zero carbon emissions from the power sector by 2050. The latest EO 246 concentrates on clean transportation and looking at carbon emissions across the economic spectrum. And we're going to work to get to a 50% economy-wide reduction in carbon emissions by 2030 and carbon neutral by 2050. But today, we'll be talking about how wind energy fits in, and particularly offshore wind. It is compelling, as Secretary Sanders mentioned it, that we're talking about a potential $140 billion investment in wind, offshore wind by the year 2035. North Carolina must not only be ready for this, we have to encourage it. And it is why I signed Executive Order 218, which sets offshore wind goals and creates this forum today that encourages government, the private sector, advocates, the community, the military, and all of these leaders to come together to make offshore wind happen here. Already, big moves are happening. Avangrid Renewables is developing Kitty Hawk offshore that could power 700,000 homes. The federal government planning to hold a lease auction for Wilmington East wind energy area. 500,000 homes could be powered by this. And I have signed a Smart Power memorandum with the governors of both Virginia and Maryland to help us find ways to move forward together. Now we need you in this room today to help us with the next steps, with the next ideas, with the next opportunities, and with advocacy at the end of the day. Because time is of the essence when we're talking about offshore wind. The earlier we can get into this, the more we can reap the economic benefits from it. And it is astounding the amount of clean energy that we can produce and the amount of money that can go in the pockets of North Carolinians. I am so excited about this opportunity, and I look forward to these meetings as they move along. We must leverage the federal money that's coming down to this. We must leverage the grid investments that we are going to need to make this happen. And we must all do it together because it's going to take private sector investment and it's going to take public sector investment to get there. Guys, this is where it happens, right here. And I'm grateful for all of you sitting in this room, finding ways to accommodate each other, making sure that we do this the right way. Thanks so much for letting me be here, and good luck.
Thank you, Governor Cooper. Thank you, Governor Cooper. As a point of personal privilege, I'm going to deviate slightly from our agenda. We are in the beautiful city of Wilmington, and how befitting that Mayor Bill Sappho stopped by to say hello to us this morning. So I'd like to introduce Mayor Sappho, and if you would, Mayor Sappho, you are welcome to make some comments to this task force.
Well, good morning, and I would just like to say on behalf of all of the citizens of Wilmington, welcome to Wilmington, North Carolina. This is an exciting group that has been put together to study this very important and significant issue, not only for our state, but also for our country. I wish you the best. I know there's be a lot of debate and discussion about this, but based on what I've seen with the pictures and the view sheds, I think it's appropriate, and I think it's time for us to get it done. And good luck and Godspeed. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Sappho. This task force is put together, includes some phenomenal talent. And I want to take a moment so that we get to know each and every member, some who are here in this room, some who have joined us virtually. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Marquita Welton, Chief of Staff for the North Carolina Department of Commerce. It's my pleasure to serve under Secretary Michelle Baker Sanders. Prior to joining Commerce, I was Deputy Secretary at the Department of Administration. My prior experience includes serving as Deputy County Manager for the Durham County government and state, county, and city work. I started my public service work for the City of North Las Vegas, where I served as Deputy City Attorney, HR Director, and Employee and Labor Relations Manager. Okay, so we're supposed to advance. If someone could, next slide, please. Greg Andet.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Greg Ant.
Is the Director of Strategy and Government Relations for North Carolina State Office of National Audubon Society. At Audubon, Greg oversees the group's policy priorities, engagement, and state leaders, including the areas of climate, clean energy, and offshore wind. He also leads policy and message development, grassroots engagement, and coordination with partner organizations. Prior to joining Audubon, Greg led Environmental Defense Fund's Clean Energy Program in North Carolina, where he engaged companies, regulators, and policymakers to transform the state's electricity grid in a way that increased renewables, energy efficiency, and reductions in air pollution. Thank you, Greg. Lori Barnhart. Lori Lewis Barnhart was born and raised in North Carolina. She grew up on a berry farm, Lewis Nursery and Farms in Pender County, which her dad founded in 1953 and her brother now operates. Her heart is near and dear to agriculture and rural North Carolina. She's the North Carolina Executive Director for Conservatives for Energy. Laura also lobbies for the North Carolina State Range, an agriculture, rural-based membership organization that advocates for agriculture and rural communities. Prior to this role, she worked for Representative Craig Horn at the North Carolina General Assembly. Lori is married to Jeff Barnhart, Senior Vice President of McGuire Woods. Gray Blount. Gray is originally from Greenville. Pardon me for a moment. Gray is originally from Greenville, graduated with a BSBA from East Carolina University in 1993. After graduation, he worked for his family business, Home Builder Supply Company, for more than 25 years and is still an owner. Gray currently owns and operates Desperado fishing charters out of Oregon Inlet. He and his wife, Nikki, have been married for 20 years. They have two sons, Will, 18, and Redding, 15. Mayor Bill Ben Cahoon. Mayor Bill Ben Cahoon is a lifelong North Carolinian, the two-term mayor of Nags Head, and a fellow of the American Institute of Architects for over 30 years. He's been a leader in coastal resilience efforts and notably played key roles in the establishment of the Coastal Studies Institute. From 2016 to 2020, Ben authored editorials, testified before Congress, and organized coastal mayors to successfully oppose offshore oil drilling. He was selected by Governor Cooper to moderate the 2019 Coastal Resiliency Clean Energy Roundtable. Thank you, Mayor Cahoon. Christopher Chung. Christopher Chung is CEO of the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina and brings more than 24 years of state-level economic development experience to the role. As a public-private partnership, the EDPNC is responsible for a number of economic development functions on behalf of the state of North Carolina, including new business recruitment, existing business support, international trade and export assistance, small business startup counseling, and tourism, sports, and film promotion. Chris previously held various executive and management responsibilities at the Missouri Partnership and the Ohio Department of Development, now known as Jobs Ohio. Chris resides in Raleigh with his wife Emily and daughter Elizabeth. Brian Clark is Executive Director of the North Carolina State's Port Authority, a position he assumed in January 2021. Under Brian's leadership, North Carolina ports completed critical infrastructure improvements, including container berth renovations, turning basin expansions, air draft improvements, and the addition of 3 new Neo-Panamax cranes, crucial to the work we'll be talking about today. Also, the Port of Wilmington was recognized by the Journal of Commerce as the most productive port in North America, as well as the fastest growing port in the commerce. As of the most productive port in North America, as well as the fastest growing port in the United States. Brian's more than 25 years of experience in the maritime industry, having worked in senior positions in port operations in several U.S. locations, including APM terminals in Port Elizabeth, New Jersey, and APM terminals in Mobile, Alabama. Brian is a graduate of the United States Merchant Marine Academy. Thank you, Brian. Phyllis Craig Taylor. Phyllis is a veteran legal educator and specialist in the fields of land use planning, real estate finance, environmental justice, and land tenure and retention. She's an experienced academic administrator. Most recently, she served as the Dean of North Carolina Central University Law School, where she currently serves as a professor. Her professional and community service includes board service for a number of nonprofit organizations, managing director for the American Bar Association, active membership and committee service, North Carolina State Bar. Her prior appointments include a United States presidential appointment to the President's Advisory Board for Historically Black Colleges and Universities and the North Carolina Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism and the Law. Kevin Dick was named President and Chief Executive Officer of the Carolina Small Business Development Fund in February 2020. Under the first year of his leadership, the organization responded quickly and aggressively to the needs of small businesses by providing financial assistance to over 1,100 small businesses throughout the state and deploying over $17 million in loan and grant funds. During that period, the organization assisted over 200 businesses in technical assistance and coaching. Kevin has more than 2 decades experience in local government and private sector in marketing and sales. He's held senior positions with the City of Charlotte, Durham, Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and the Durham Workforce Development Board, the Broward Workforce Development Board, and the City of Dania Beach, Florida, as well as private sector marketing and sales experience positions in New Jersey and Delaware. Hayes Frame. Hayes is Senior Manager of Government Relations and Communications for Orsted. In this role, Hayes oversees the state and local government outreach, stakeholder, and supply chain engagement, and increasing brand recognition in the Southeast to help power the U.S. and economy entirely on green energy. Secretary Walter Gaskin. Lieutenant General Walter Gaskins is currently serving as the Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. Lieutenant Gaskin has served on the North Carolina Military Affairs Commission. From 2010 until his retirement from the United States Marine Corps in 2013, Lieutenant Gaskin served as the Deputy Chairman of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, Military Committee in Brussels, Belgium, providing strategic military counsel on operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya to NATO's Secretary General and North Atlantic Council. Lieutenant Gaskin has also served as the Commanding General of the 2nd Marine Division at Camp Lejeune from June 2006 to July 2008. In addition to this role, he simultaneously served as the Commanding General of 2 Marine Expeditionary Force Forward during its year-long deployment to Al-Anbar Province, Iraq, as the Commanding General of Multinational Forces West. Thank you, Secretary Gaskin, for serving. Christine Goebel. Christine serves as Assistant Counsel at the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. Christy has been legal counsel to North Carolina Division of Coastal Management since 2004 as an Assistant Attorney General at North Carolina Department of Justice, and for the last 6 years, in-house at the Department of Environmental Quality. She also advises the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries on shellfish and submerged land issues. She is a Michigander, growing up in East Lansing and graduating from my alma mater, Wayne State University Law School, before tiring of the cold, as did I. Tiring of the cold and moving to North Carolina in 2000. Welcome, Christy. David Goss. In 2005, David moved to Hertford, North Carolina from Cleveland, Ohio to retire. Since 2006, he served as an economic development consultant for Perquimans County. In 2020, he became a mentor of the Business Network for Offshore Wind. David's career spans 4 decades in both public service and private industries, including several years of service in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. He earned his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Bucknell University and master's degree in engineering from the University of California, Berkeley. Susie Hamilton. Susie has served the state of North Carolina in her hometown of Wilmington for nearly 25 years. She was named Secretary of the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources by Governor Roy Cooper as member of his first term cabinet. As a state legislator, Susie served her constituents in Brunswick County and New Hanover counties in the North Carolina House of Representatives from 2001 until January 2017. Currently, Susie serves as the Economic Development Advisor in the North Carolina Department of Transportation. Susie has given her time and expertise to many boards and commissions, including the North Carolina Museum of Art, Governor Roy Cooper's Advisory Council on Film, TV, and Digital Streaming. She serves as chair, and the North Carolina Symphony, UNSCA Association of Public Administration, Wilmington Chapter, and the North Carolina Downtown Development Association. Thank you, Susie. Perry Harker. Perry is the Vice President of Workforce Training at Carteret Community College, where he oversees the college's non-credit workforce training programs. Perry is a graduate of East Carolina University School of Business. Perry is active in his community through volunteering and serving on several boards. Perry is a former elected member of the Carteret County Board of Education. Serving 8 years to as chairman, he currently serves as the Beaufort Housing Authority Board, Carteret Public School Foundation Chair, and as governor's appointed trustee of the North Carolina Center for the Advancement of Teaching. Perry is married to Sharon Harker, mayor of Beaufort, and they have 3 adult children. Stephen Calland. Steve is executive director of the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center at North Carolina State University and has over 25 years of experience in the clean energy field. Steve directs activities in research, clinical assistance, economic development, energy policy, and workforce development across programs in renewable energy, energy efficiency, green building, and clean transportation. Steve currently serves on the board of the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, the advisory board of the Environmental and Energy Institute in Washington, D.C., and Duke Energy State President's Advisory Council. He is the past board member of the Interstate Renewable Energy Council and the U.S. Combined Heat and Power Association and North Carolina Green Power. Previously, Steve was the Director for Government Relations at Xantrix Technology, Executive Director of the Maryland, D.C., Virginia Solar Energy Industries Association, and Director of State Programs and Policy at National SEIA. That's a lot of work, Steve. David Kelly. David serves as North Carolina State Director for Environmental Defense Fund, where he leads EDF's environmental public health and conservation initiatives at the state, local, and federal levels. Driven by EDF's signature solutions-based approach, David builds long-term relationships with leaders and organizations in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors to advance durable policy solutions to North Carolina's environmental and public health challenges. David oversees a permanent state-based team dedicated to creating a cleaner, healthier, and more sustainable future for all North Carolinians. David has been with the EDF team in Raleigh for more than 13 years, during which he has served in a variety of program and government relations roles, stepping into the North Carolina State Director role in 2021. Welcome, David. Kevin Lackey. Kevin graduated from the University of North Carolina. Kevin Lackey. Kevin graduated from the University of North Carolina in 2005, and he began work for publicly traded manufacturer of conveyor components as a product engineer. He transitioned to a privately held technology company in Honolulu, that manufactures action cameras and develops its own video editing software. He returned to North Carolina to earn his Master's of Public Administration and graduated top in his class from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington in 2017. Since then, Kevin has since been a key team member in Brunswick County's economic development efforts. Welcome, Kevin. Greer Martin. Representative Greer Martin is serving his 9th term in the North Carolina House. In his tenure in the House, Representative Martin chaired the Transportation Subcommittee of the House Appropriations Committee, where he was responsible for drafting the state's $4 billion transportation budget. He also chaired the House Homeland Security, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee and the Joint Select Committee on Emergency Preparedness and Disaster Management Recovery. He currently serves as the chair of the North Carolina Military Affairs Commission. The Secretary of the Defense appointed Martin to serve 2 terms as a member of the Reserve Forces Policy Board. For his work, Representative Martin has received several awards, including Legislator of the Year Award from the North Carolina Disabled American Veterans and the Defender of the American Environment Award from the North Carolina League of Conservation Voters. Representative Martin is an officer in the U.S. Army Reserve and has served as a field artillery officer and judge advocate. He is a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. Thank you for your service, Representative Martin. Mark McIntyre. Mark serves as Director of Government and Environmental Affairs for Duke Energy in North Carolina. This is the latest in a series of roles during his 10 years with the company. Before arriving at Duke Energy, Mark worked as a consulting engineer focused on infrastructure and sustainability, managing large projects in the United States and the Middle East. He began his career in the mid-1990s with the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality in what is now the Division of Water Resources. He earned a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Engineering and a Master's of Civil Engineering from North Carolina State University. He is a licensed professional engineer, a member of the American Academy of Environmental Engineers, and a certified carbon reduction manager. He lives in Raleigh with his wife, 2 kids, and 1 large fluffy dog. Welcome, Mark. Ashley McLeod. Ashley is lead offshore wind public affairs director for Avangrid Renewables' Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind Project. In this role, Ashley engages with residents, businesses, elected officials, agencies, civic groups, NGOs, and government officials, keeping them updated and aware of project development, sharing potential benefits with the community, and listening. Ashley established a field office in Virginia Beach when she joined the team in August 2020. Prior to the Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind Project, Ashley was the Vice President of Communications and Membership for the Virginia Maritime Association, a trade organization advocating on behalf of maritime industries, which included active promotion of offshore wind development in the Mid-Atlantic region. She has been executive director of several nonprofits, as well as an elected member of the Virginia Beach School Board. One of her proudest accomplishments is the Maritime Leadership Certificate program she established with VMA, inspiring a new generation of maritime leaders. Welcome, Ashley. Bob Peel. Bob, originally from Bear Grass, North Carolina, and served the offices of U.S. Congressman Walter Jones Sr. and H. Martin Lancaster from 1987 to 1994. Bob has decades experience in coastal and fishery industries, including serving as the Assistant Director of the North Carolina Fisheries Association in New Bern, coordinator of the North Carolina-Oregon Inlet Project. Bob has served as Director of the Wanchese Food Industrial Park since 2000. He has also served as a commissioner in Kill Devil Hills on the Outer Banks Chamber of Commerce Board, Director, including as chairman. Bob currently serves on the board of directors of OBX Outer Banks Room in the Inn, a faith-based organization that provides winter housing for the homeless population in Dare County. Bob's duties for Wanchese Park include business recruitment and retention, staffing the North Carolina Seafood Industrial Park Authority, and daily interaction with park tenants, officials, and the public. Bob resides in Manteo and has 2 kids, Holly and Robert, and is a member of Manteo Baptist Church. Welcome, Bob. Michelle Query. Michelle is Carteret County's Director of Economic Development. She is a native Texan and graduate of Texas A&M University. She obtained a Master's of Arts in Public Administration and spent 4 years working on Capitol Hill. Michelle became active in campaigns and elections and spent time in Florida, where she also served in county government. Michelle founded a consulting firm with an emphasis on fundraising, marketing, real estate, and community development. In 2018, for the 3rd time in her career, the road less traveled brought her back to Eastern North Carolina. She is proud to call Carteret County her home. Dan Segovia. Dan Segovia is the business manager, financial secretary, treasurer for Ironworkers Local Union 848. He started his career as an apprentice in 2002, now represents members of his organization throughout the Carolinas. He deals directly with apprenticeship and training, where he is the chairperson of a joint labor and employer committee overseeing the program. Dan's expertise is in recruitment and training. He is the son of a Vietnam veteran, the father of 4 girls and 2 granddaughters. Dan has been married to his wonderful wife, Jennifer, 16 years. Jamie Simmons. Jamie has been a program manager with the Southeastern Wind Coalition since 2017. In this role, Jamie works with a variety of stakeholders to advance offshore wind in North Carolina, including outreach and education campaign development, partner coordination, and research. Jamie graduated from Green Mountain College with a Green MBA, completing a preliminary sustainability pathway for a power systems manufacturer as her capstone project. Prior to the Southeastern Wind Coalition, Jamie worked in the healthcare and residential mortgage industries. Jamie is a member of the Women of Renewables Industries and Sustainable Energy, and previously served as treasurer of the board of directors of Toxic Free North Carolina. She holds a lean management certificate focused on continued operational improvement. Originally from Columbus, Ohio, Jamie lives in Durham, North Carolina with her daughter, her husband, John, and Hattie. Hattie is her daughter. Glenn Skinner. Glenn is a lifelong commercial fisherman, currently the executive director of the North Carolina Fisheries Association, which serves fishing communities by advocating for sustainable fisheries, preserving fishing heritage, and promoting wild-caught North Carolina seafood. Glenn takes pride in our state's fishing heritage and understands the importance of coastal communities. Welcome, Glenn. Justin Sosney. Justin currently serves as head of the United Kingdom's Government Office in North Carolina, based in Raleigh. A native Eastern North Carolinian, Justin is passionate about deepening ties between North Carolina and the United Kingdom in order to expand economic opportunity and create a more sustainable future for the citizens on both sides of the Atlantic. Prior to his current role, Justin served 7 years as policy advisor at the United States Department of State in Washington, D.C., primarily in the Secretary's Office of Global Women's Issues, followed by 7 years in executive roles at Bauer Group Asia, a leading strategic consultancy advising Fortune 500 companies in how to navigate the Asia-Pacific's complex policy environment. Justin holds a Master's of Science in Public Policy and Management from Carnegie Mellon University and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Romance Languages from the University of Chapel Hill. He is a proud husband of Aaron and father of Levi and Eva. Welcome, Justin. Whit Tuttle. Whit is the director of Visit North Carolina, part of the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, where he oversees North Carolina's official state tourism office. A 30-year tourism industry veteran, Whit has been with North Carolina Tourism since 2006. During this time, the office has been recognized with numerous national awards. He serves on the boards of the United States Travel Association and Travel South USA. He has also worked for Universal Studios Florida and Visit Orlando and was a reporter for the Anchorage Times in Alaska. Thank you, Whit. I think I've been remiss and did I skip Trish? Okay. Trish Murphy is the Executive Assistant to Councils for the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries and is a member of the South Atlantic Fisheries Management Council, which manages fish stock in the exclusive economic zone from North Carolina to the Florida Keys. Previously, Trish was watershed manager for the Albemarle-Pamlico National Estuary Partnership and assisted with developing the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan Amendment. Before, she was the Southern District Manager for DMF and oversaw fisheries management in coastal counties from Carteret County to the South Carolina state line. Trish has a bachelor's degree in marine science from Florida Institute of Technology. I'd like to thank all of our task members for your dedication to this issue and for agreeing to serve. Welcome. At this time, I'd like to introduce staff, or actually we're going to have staff introduce themselves. And if you would please, using the microphone, stand and give a brief introduction.
Hello, can you hear me? All right, I'm John Harden, and I am the Executive Director of the Office of Science, Technology, and Innovation in the North Carolina Department of Commerce. And our office works on strategic planning for the state in the science, technology, and innovation realm. And we also run grant programs to help small businesses develop new technologies and take them to market. But we also are lucky enough to take on emerging issues when they spring up and have an economic development component. And this is one of those. And for the last 3 years, we've been working hard on this. And some of the work that you'll see today is the result of some of the work that we've done. But now that my colleague Jennifer Munt is here and she will introduce herself, we will remain involved, but she will be taking the lead. So Jennifer.
Thank you, John. That's a great segue. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jennifer Munt, for those of you who I haven't met before. It's really great to see you all here, and thank you for supporting the work of the department on the Secretary's behalf. I just joined the department. This is the close of my 4th full week with Commerce, and so getting my legs underneath me, but I promise that I bring with me a host of background and knowledge in the offshore wind policy, regulatory, and development realm, and I'm happy to be sharing that with y'all here as we move forward. Prior to joining the Department of Commerce, I spent a better part of 5 years at the Department of Environmental Quality, serving as the Senior Policy Advisor under then Secretary, now Administrator Regan. And before that, I spent over a decade of time at our General Assembly as a Senior Legislative Analyst, where I had the privilege of working with members as they sought and tried to implement their various policy and legislative initiatives, taking it from a kernel of an idea across the finish line to a governor's signature. And so working in some spaces now where I help to develop those ideas, and now on the implementation side has really been an interesting and rewarding bookend to career. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Emily. Thank you.
to working with you all, and it's a pleasure to be with you here in Wilmington today.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Nancy Severino. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Communications and Public Affairs at Commerce, and I'm here with some of our team as well, and I look forward to talking about the great work that all of you will be doing. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dana Magliola. I'm the Program Manager for Freight and Logistics for the North Carolina Department of Transportation, housed in the NCDOT Rail Division. There's so much of an opportunity for supply chain development around this industry sector, and North Carolina is in a great place, and exciting to see such an awesome group of talent brought together to make this happen. So thanks for having me to be a part of it, and we're here to work.
Hello, everyone. My name is Colin Kaiser with the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina. I serve as the Senior International Business Development Manager, focusing mostly on Indian and European markets. And given that the offshore wind supply chain is almost exclusively European at this point, been brought in to make sure that we are getting in front of European companies telling the story and the value proposition of North Carolina. But not only that, since this is a new emerging issue, it's unlike any other sector that we just kind of simply go and recruit and already have the ecosystem. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. So excited to work with all of you in your different proficiencies and specialties, and hopefully bringing in jobs and investment into North Carolina. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Lex Janes. I'm the Legislative Affairs Director for the North Carolina Department of Commerce. I'll be serving as the lead Commerce staff liaison for the Outreach and Engagement Subcommittee. Prior to joining the Department of Commerce in 2019, I served as the Legislative Director for the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources under Secretary Susie Hamilton. And I'm greatly looking forward to working with the task force on this very exciting and important issue. Thanks.
Hi, thank you. I'm Dion Delegati. I'm the the Governor's Director of Clean Energy, and moved over here from DEQ and was previously with the Environmental Defense Fund. So I know many of you from those past experiences, and I'm excited to learn more about how wind fits into our broader efforts to decarbonize our power sector, and looking forward to learning a lot from this group. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jeremy Tarr, Governor Cooper's Senior Advisor for Climate Change Policy. I came into the administration in the first couple months in 2017 and grew up in North Carolina, came through UNC Law School, Davidson College, UNC Law School, worked at the Supreme Court of North Carolina, Duke University, and then US EPA before joining the administration. I work on many issues related to climate change, both reducing emissions and improving the state's resiliency to the impacts we're seeing from increased frequency and intensity of various types of storm events. Topics many of you here are familiar with and unfortunately experiencing firsthand. Working on offshore wind with some of the colleagues who've already introduced themselves over the past year has been pretty exciting, and this is a day that really started a couple of years ago when Jennifer and John and I think together came up with some of the ideas of having a task force like this. And so it's really gratifying to see all of you here, all of your commitment to these issues, and working hard to bring together, make the most of the economic opportunities that offshore wind presents to North Carolina. It's not, I think that's the lead story here. So thanks for your commitment and time to this task force.
Hello, I'm back again, and I get the privilege of introducing Andy Geisbuehler, who is not officially Department of Commerce staff. This is Andy, but we consider him honorary staff because he has done so much valuable work on behalf of the state of North Carolina for offshore wind. So let me read a little bit of his bio. Andy is leading Atlantic Power Transmission, which is a Blackstone Infrastructure Partners portfolio company providing comprehensive transmission solutions delivering offshore wind power to U.S. households. That's a mouthful, but Andy has worked in the offshore wind sector for quite a while. He brings over 25 years of experience in engineering, procurement, and construction related to multinational organizations such as ABB, Alstom, and GE. His responsibilities with GE included turbine supply installation and port logistics for the Block Island project, which is the nation's first commercial offshore wind project in Rhode Island. And it has 5 turbines operating currently. Further, he served as chairman for several wind energy operators. Andy is an American and a Swiss citizen. He holds a master's in engineering from ETH in Zurich and an MBA from William and Mary Mason School of Business in Virginia. Speaking of his Swiss citizenship, Andy is multifunctional, just like a Swiss Army wife, and has provided very valuable service to the state of North Carolina, and he will be a presenter later on in the offshore wind presentation.
Thank you, Andy. Welcome. State. Is there anyone that has not been introduced? But let me introduce, I have 3 other staff present who haven't introduced themselves. Nicole Williams, my executive assistant and right hand, my left hand today. Alan Sandoval, our IT director, and Patrice Bethea, our communications team member. Thank you to all of you for making sure that we have everything today. So now let's talk about why we are here. Offshore wind is a global market with an international supply chain and a growing demand in Asia and the United States. The industry was launched in 1991 with the demand in Asia and US. The industry was launched in 1991 with the construction of the first offshore wind project off the coast of Denmark. Many of the developers in the industry, as you've heard mentioned earlier, are European. UK is the largest global player in offshore wind with a current installed base of nearly 8 gigawatts. Put a pin on that. Offshore wind is an exciting frontier that is becoming more and more cost competitive. It's 80% cheaper to harness energy from the wind now than it was 10 years ago. The technologies are proven. In the long term, it costs less than fossil fuels, petroleum, coal, and natural gas. The fundamental drivers for offshore wind are energy security, decarbonization, and the creation of industry and jobs. Offshore wind may be the single biggest thing we can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and grow the economy at the same time. From the beginning phase through assembly, build out, and deployment, more than 74 occupations are needed for the comprehensive execution of offshore wind farms. That's according to the Workforce Development Institute of New York State. In Executive Order 218 gives us a goal of 2.8 gigawatts off the North Carolina coast by 2030 and 8 gigawatts by 2040. Achieving these goals will power roughly 2.3 million homes by 2040. Wind is an unlimited resource that can potentially meet global electricity demand, and we have a lot of it. There is huge potential project activity to drive local economic growth. That means investment here and jobs here. Offshore wind can coexist with other ocean uses we value. And as a task force, we want to make sure of that. We are the pioneers of sort in that we have before us an opportunity to develop a blueprint for success as a key state in our nation's pursuit of a clean energy economy. The question is not if offshore wind will come to North Carolina, but when. Our job is to create the framework and prepare our state for when. Next slide, please. So why have we been pulled together? To help North Carolina transition to a clean energy economy using offshore wind to combat greenhouse gas emissions, which contributes to climate change. Next slide, please. So what do we need to have when we're done here? What's our product? An annual report of task force recommendations. That's what we're going to produce. Recommendations for policies and programs for developing offshore wind energy projects, recommendations for enhancing the state supply chain for offshore wind industry, creating and developing workforce to support offshore wind energy projects, ensuring equitable access, particularly in underserved communities, to the economic benefits created by the offshore wind industry. So what do we need to address? We'll need to address how best to ensure meaningful, fair, and equitable public engagement in decision-making. We need to address how to connect technology research capacity at state institutions of higher learning with offshore wind industry needs. We need to leverage North Carolina's resources and interests with Smart Power, the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic Regional Transformative Partnership for Offshore Wind Energy Resources. How best to work with our partner states, Maryland and Virginia. So how are we going to go about doing our work? Our process involves leveraging task force members' expertise and knowledge on subcommittees, focused on key tasks and areas pertinent to developing North Carolina's offshore wind industry. On this task force, we have a wealth of knowledge, skills, expertise, and experience that we can draw from to inform the work that we're charged with doing. Each task force member is responsible for committing to attending all scheduled meetings to the extent possible and participating in discussions and activities openly and honestly, respecting the opinions of other task force members and sharing your unique perspectives. That's why you're on this task force, because we value each of your opinions. We value the skills and expertise that you bring and the knowledge base. Task force members are responsible for researching and networking to enhance your offshore wind knowledge base, for contributing to subcommittee and task force goals, and for completing assigned tasks by agreeing upon deadlines and providing timely feedback when asked. So what resources do we have available to us? The biggest resource is each other. Our staff liaisons, educational institutions, industry experts, other states and countries. Remember I said put a pin on it. The UK is almost where we aim to be in 2040. They're almost there now. So that's 18 years from now. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We have resources available to us to draw from. We have a task force member, Justin Sosney, who is here to make sure we build any bridges and can learn and partner as best we can to make our endeavors here successful. Other resources include workforce development boards, trade unions, state and local governments, and community stakeholders. They're so important to this process. This list is not exhaustive, but just to put in mind, we have a lot of resources to make things happen. Constraints, well, there's no money, folks. We don't have any money allocated to this task force. Okay, but we're only limited by our imaginations because we can make some things happen, okay? Limited staff capacity. Our staff their plates are already overflowing, but we have a room full of committed people who are excited and thrilled about being able to participate in this process, who want to make this as successful as possible for this state. So while I say limited staff capacity, we have people who will give 110% to this task force. So we do have, I consider that a resource more than a constraint. Advisory task force, okay? We are advisory, which means we don't get to actually write the laws, but we do have power. We have power to influence them, okay? So who do we need to let know what we're doing? Of course, Secretary Sanders, who formed this task force, the governor and General Assembly, and we'll report through our committee reports and our annual reports to the community. And we have a website, in case you haven't checked it out. NC Towers has a website to keep the public informed. And we as task force members will communicate to our networks and through our networks and individual relationships. So we have a lot of resources, we have a lot of connections, and a lot of opportunity to make great things happen for North Carolina with the offshore wind energy. So at this time, I think it's close to, no, I'm past time. I'm 8 minutes over, but we didn't do too bad with a little technical difficulty. I think we're close to on time. And so again, I want to welcome everyone, our viewing audience who's watching my live stream. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to go on break for lunch, and we will resume at, what's our designated time? 1:10. We're going to move into presenting key findings and recommendations from building North Carolina's offshore wind supply chain. Our presenters are John Hardin, Executive Director of the Office of Science, Technology, and Innovation, Jennifer Munt, the Assistant Secretary of Clean Energy for Economic Development, and Andy Geisbuehler of RRI. Go ahead, John, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Marquita. We have a presentation that we will walk you through, and we want to make sure that everybody has background on the supply chain work and ports and infrastructure analysis that's been done heretofore, and make sure that everybody's kind of level set and we have a good, convenient, consistent starting place. So I will cover a portion of the slides. Andy Geisbuehler will cover a portion, and then Jennifer will wrap it up with the remainder of the slides.
And John, may I just interject for a moment and say, I know sometimes we frantically take notes, but we will have these PowerPoint slides available on our website after the meeting.
Yes, that is true. And we have allocated a good amount of time for Q&A after this as well. And someone who is not in the room today, but is online, is Mike Blanche from BVG Associates. He's the Associate Director. And BVG is the consulting firm that conducted our supply chain and ports assessment. And Mike will be here for the Q&A session as well. He's not a presenter, but he'll be here for the Q&A. One moment.
Good afternoon all, and I hope you had a good lunch.
Okay, so here's a quick overview of the presentation. Going to provide a little background information about how we arrived at where we are today. Then we're going to dig in a little deeper about identifying what the opportunity is for North Carolina. We're going to talk a little bit about the infrastructure we have, the supply chain, workforce, and then we're going to give you a sample of some of the key recommendations that were in the report. There were 48 recommendations in the report. I imagine most of you have already committed those to memory, but we are going to refresh your memory a little bit and give you just a sample of those. And Jennifer's going to tell you a little bit about a cost benefit analysis that was recently conducted to talk about what the economic opportunity is associated with offshore wind. And then we'll talk about next steps. So offshore wind, as the governor noted, is important for several reasons, but these are three big reasons that motivated us as a state and as the Department of Commerce. Number one, it can mean billions of dollars in economic development, and that's billions with a B, not millions. It can mean thousands of new jobs, and it can mean a significant increase in renewable energy generation. And so it's strong on the economic front, on the energy front, and on the environmental front. And it's rare that you can have a technology and an economic sector that's strong on all of those. And the reason that it's so strong on all those is not just because of the activity that will occur off the coast of North Carolina, but it's really the activity up and down the entire East Coast of the US. And so when we talk about offshore wind, we clearly are talking about offshore wind off the coast of North Carolina, But even if there were no activity off the coast of North Carolina, this is still a significant opportunity for North Carolina because of all the activity in all the other states. So on that map, you can see the kind of peach colored areas that are out in the ocean. All of those are approved wind energy areas. They're not leased, well, they don't have turbines in them yet, but they are all approved by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And that's the first of many steps that's required to get a wind farm operational in the ocean. And so in the coming years and decades, those all will have turbines in them, and those turbines and their component parts need to be made somewhere. And right now, a lot of that is done in Europe, as Colin Kaiser noted earlier. But that will eventually be occurring in the US. And as a North Carolinian, I would like a lot of that to occur in North Carolina, and I imagine you all would too. And North Carolina is really well positioned to seize a lot of this activity and seize in a gentle, friendly sort of way, in a just, make sure we take advantage of the opportunity. And that's because of all the states that you see listed there. You see they're all shaded green, but you see that North Carolina is shaded the darkest green. And that's because North Carolina has the strongest manufacturing economy on the East Coast of the US. It has the largest share of its GDP, gross domestic product, that comes from manufacturing than any other state. And so it has a long tradition in manufacturing. And there are lots of opportunities to take existing companies and help them pivot to this new opportunity, as well as recruit companies from Europe, companies from other states to get into this market. And so that was a big motivator for the study that we did. As far as offshore wind development, when you add up all the areas that you see listed there in peach, what we see now is that there are state-driven offshore wind targets reaching 40 gigawatts, and that is a lot. As you can see on the bottom slide, 1 gigawatt of offshore wind power, it powers about 380,000 homes. And if you multiply 380,000 by 40, which I did, that's about 15 million. And each household in the US on average has 2.5 people in the household. So you multiply 15 million by 2.5, and that's a lot of people whose homes and businesses are being powered potentially by offshore wind. So there are about 20 gigawatts of active projects in the procurement phase. There's 40 gigawatts in total as far as targets. Not all those are active yet, but you'll see in a minute how that's going to play out over time. And that's the opportunity we want to get out ahead of to make sure that we're not behind the curve. So to give you a little context, the global market for offshore wind has grown significantly, 24% annually since 2013, and it's projected to grow at more than 20% over the next 5 years. So that's a steady rate of growth, and it'll grow beyond those 5 years, but that's what we have good estimates for. In the UK, where offshore wind is very prevalent, in 2020, offshore wind accounted for 13% of the energy that was generated. If you add onshore wind to that, I think the number almost doubles. So the UK gets a lot of power from wind, and they've been doing it for a long time, and we can learn from some of their lessons. From 2015 to 2019, 7,200 offshore wind full-time equivalent jobs have been added to the economy in the UK. That's a significant number of jobs, and we'd like to see something along those lines in North Carolina and the US more generally. In 2021, 1.3 billion was invested in ports. And as you'll see, we have 2 very strong state-owned ports. We also have some smaller ports inland that all have an opportunity to play in this space. And some people say, well, how much power can you really get from a windmill? And actually, windmill is not quite the right term in this context. The term that's used is a wind turbine, and wind turbines can produce a lot of power. Theoretically, it is technically possible to power twice as much energy as the US needs from wind power if we install that many offshore wind turbines. That's a lot of turbines, and I doubt that we'll have that many installed, but it is theoretically possible to produce that much power from offshore wind. So it is a real energy resource, and it's it's something we need to take advantage of. North Carolina is particularly well positioned to take advantage of that for a couple different reasons. This is a chart from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and you can see the various states on the East Coast, and North Carolina has the tallest bar, and that's the various shadings are different water depths. And right now, almost all the development is in the shallow waters. Eventually, there'll be more development in the deeper waters as offshore or floating wind becomes a viable technology for large-scale use as well. But right now, it's fixed bottom towers. And North Carolina is strong on this front, one, because we have such a long shoreline. And if you just multiply that long shoreline in the outer continental shelf by the strong wind speeds that we have in North Carolina, that adds up to the largest net technical potential of any East Coast state. So just in terms of offshore wind, we have a lot of potential, but we also have a really strong potential in the manufacturing space, not only because of the strength of our state, but also because we're well positioned on the East Coast. We're right in the middle, north to south. Much of the activity is above us now in the north. We are the southernmost state right now that has activity, but there will be activity off the coast of South Carolina, off the coast of Georgia, and possibly off the coast of Florida as well, and even down in the Gulf. And so we are well positioned to serve that with our ports and with our manufacturing capabilities. So there's a lot going on in these charts, and we're not going to cover all this in detail. There's actually 3 charts up here. So the first is the project pipeline. This is the offshore wind project pipeline for executed offtake agreements. So these are in play. These are really happening. And a couple of years ago, we couldn't have had this chart because a lot has happened in the last few years. And you can see then the left column, those are all the developers. Those are major tier 1 developers. Each of them has a project name. You can see the various states that are involved and the amount of megawatts and that are expected to be generated by those projects. Very significant. Those alone are expected to generate 14,000 megawatts of power. But if you look at the upper right, you'll see that that is the project pipeline with committed offtake agreements. So it's not quite executed yet, but it is committed. All of that is in Virginia, and that adds up to 2,600 megawatts. And then the last table that you see is the project pipeline of well progressing offtake agreements, and that includes North Carolina. And as you'll see in a minute, North Carolina has 2 approved wind energy areas. There's the Kitty Hawk wind energy area in the north, and then there's the Wilmington East area down near Wilmington. There's also Wilmington West, but that's kind of on hold at the moment, and Jennifer will provide more information about that. But right now, Kitty Hawk has been leased. It's under lease, and when that's developed, that will produce 2,500 megawatts of power. So all of these together add up to about 20 gigawatts of active projects. That's accounted for by 1,300 turbines and foundations, which again have to be made somewhere, and also 25 substations and foundations. So this is a chart that BVG Associates, the firm that we worked with to do this supply chain assessment, produced. And some of you have read the report. You might not have seen this chart in the report because it's not in the report, and it's because this is the latest, greatest version of a chart that was in there. So that report was produced about a year ago. They had the best estimates at the time. These are now the best estimates currently. And so Andy Geisbuehler will talk a little more about that, and Mike Blanch from BVG can also talk about this. But what this means is there's a steady pipeline of projects for at least the next decade. And it stops at 2030, but that's not because activity will stop at 2030. It's because that's the year by which we can make good, accurate projections based on the data we have now. This likely will be a 20 to 30, if not longer, period of activity developing these wind farms. And so it's a long generational set of economic opportunities and employment opportunities. Now, North Carolina has been focused on this for a few years now. And this morning, I looked in my email. I saved just about every email I ever get. And I searched it for two words, and those words were Jennifer Munt, and in the from line. And I had an email from her. Actually, I had one from way back in 2009, but that was on a totally different issue. But the one around offshore wind was from 2018. And so we started talking about offshore wind in 2018. And as Jeremy Tarr noted, that the three of us started to come together along with some other people to start saying, what is this opportunity and how can we, go after this opportunity? And we were really propelled by Governor Cooper's Executive Order 80, which was North Carolina's commitment to address climate change and transition to a clean energy economy. And in a previous life, I was a political scientist. And one of the biggest powers that a chief executive has is the power to set the agenda. And in many ways, that's what the governor has done with Executive Order 80 and the other executive orders. And Marquita noted that, well, how much power does this task force have? Because, we don't really have the power to create legislation, which is true. But what I studied when I studied political science was congressional committees. And often the most powerful congressional committees were the ones that had the spotlighting power, the power to craft, to set the agenda and shine a spotlight on an issue in ways that other committees that were busy dealing with legislation didn't have the time to do. So this task force is important because it can shine a spotlight on this opportunity and do it in a diverse and a balanced sort of way that it takes advantage of all the benefits, but also makes sure that we don't, harm other good things about the state, whether it's fisheries or visibility or tourism. And so that's the goal. So Executive Order 80 produced several good outputs, one of which was the Clean Energy Plan, which was released in October of 2019. It had a very strong set of recommendations in there. One of those was a recommendation supporting a regional effort among regional states in this area having to do with offshore wind. And that has come into fruition, as the governor noted. In October of 2020, North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland signed a memorandum of understanding forming Smart Power. And that's a long acronym, but it stands for Southeast and Mid-Atlantic Regional Transformative Partnership for Offshore Wind Energy Resources. And it's if there is such a thing as the international acronym competition, we will submit this to that competition. We think we have a good chance there because these words actually mean something. I mean, they actually make sense in this context. And this is a functioning partnership. And it formed about a year ago. It meets quarterly. And North Carolina chaired it for the first year. And Jennifer Munt was the chair of that. And it's going to be continuing. And some good things have come from that. And we'll tell you more about that later. But that's actually something that you should consider in the context of the recommendations of this task force is certainly what we care about most is North Carolina. But this is not exactly a zero-sum game. Because this is such a new industry, in many ways, we're making this up as we go. And we want to attract as much of the opportunity to our region as we can. And in many ways, we can do that better as a consortium of states and get some of the activity that's occurring up in the north come down to the mid-Atlantic sooner than it would otherwise. And of course, we'll be competing against each other as well. But we think that in this case, 1 + 1 + 1 equals much more than 3. And the pie will be bigger and we can get bigger respective pieces if we work together. So I mentioned that several people have been involved in this. I'm going to highlight 3 here, but don't mean to suggest that these are the only 3 that are important. So Jennifer Munt has been involved, even though she's been at Commerce for only a month now. She was at the Department of Environmental Quality for years before that, and really was one of the key people who kind of kicked this off. She's had a heavy role because it's a regulatory agency, in dealing with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, but has also been very heavily involved in the economic development efforts as well. Jeremy Tarr from the governor's office has been kind of the quarterback on this, making sure that the Department of Environmental Quality is working with the Department of Commerce and all the other agencies that you'll see in just a minute. And then I've been involved at the Department of Commerce in more of an economic development role, helping to do the supply chain analysis, every once in a while doing an economic impact analysis, and periodically doing presentations like this. But we also have a big interagency leadership team that involves the Department of Transportation, Department of Environmental Quality, the EDP&C, and the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, among others. There are others as well. So this group came together. You know, I noted that we've known for a few years that offshore wind was an important opportunity, but what we didn't know was the size of that opportunity, what North Carolina's assets were with respect to that. Are we ahead of the game? Are we behind the game? Can we really make a legitimate play in this space? All of that. We had a sense, but we didn't know for sure. And so we were fortunate enough to have some resources with which we could write a request for proposals to hire a consulting firm to answer these questions. For example, what is the offshore wind opportunity for North Carolina? How big is it? And what do we go after? What are our assets and advantages? And what are some recommendations that we can pursue to make sure that we maximize those opportunities? So we put out a competitive request for proposals. We got more than 24, if I remember right, back. And we selected the winning team, which was led by BVG Associates, which is a private firm based in the UK, has a long expertise in offshore wind. And they brought together with them a team that included Lloyd's Register to look into the ports and infrastructure and other infrastructure. Timmins Group, which many of you may be familiar with, US based, but do a lot of work in North Carolina. NC State University had two divisions. They had the Workforce Development Division, and then they also had the Clean Energy Technology Center. And Steve Calland, who is one of the task force members, is the head of that center. And so what they produced is this report, which I imagine most of you have read, which is on the Department of Commerce's website. And this really helped put us on the map. When this report was released, the amount of coverage that North Carolina received, the amount of inquiries that started coming into the Department of Commerce and to the EDP&C about offshore wind, both from the economic side as well as the environmental and energy side, really increased. And so this task force is the next evolution. This report is great. It'll hold up for a long time. Now we need to start implementing many of the recommendations that are in there and to take this to the next level. And so that's why we have the task force that we have today. And I'm going to turn it over to Andy.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here and share, some thoughts and be part of this important meeting. And even though being a speaker sometimes is a little bit stressful, you can take off the mask. That is really definitely a privilege. I just wanted to make a few introductory comments about how North Carolina has really managed and led that entry. There's the so-called early entrants, who are the pioneers, but they have all kinds of issues and setbacks. And then the late entrants, they kind of are too late and the capacities are already contracted and it's hard to get a good piece of the business. And I would say, and it's not a scientific term, but I would say North Carolina is really the ideal timing entrant. I think it's really brilliant. The timing was picked brilliantly, not too early and spinning wheels, but also not too late. So I think it's very strategic. And we started with really looking at the supply chain because that's the inherent strength North Carolina has built over years. The whole manufacturing advantages, but also the business friendliness and the logistics and everything coming with it. But I think what really put an edge on it now, as we have an 80 gigawatt offshore wind target, and also that we have a massive project at Kitty Hawk, very far progressed, and that North Carolina managed to also get a piece of the future leases with the upcoming lease auction, Wilmington East. I think that was very difficult to get that slot, and I think that was a very strategic move. So I think very impressive. So very pleased to be part of that, and I greatly enjoyed working with Jennifer and John and Steve and the whole team, and Jeremy, of course, driving this from the governor's office side. This chart is kind of a complicated chart. It's constantly changing, you know, because projects are shifting. But the key message is we got approximately 20 gigawatts of projects, which are active projects with lease areas and offtake agreements. Some of them are in the last steps, but that is very relevant from a supply chain point of view. So these are more and more desperate developers who need to secure their supply chain. And, you know, Governor Cooper kind of mentioned $140 billion is kind of the opportunity. And this first tranche is, you know, about 60 billion alone, just this, and then the whole industry will be 140. And just to give you a quick calculation, you know, when you have gigawatts, it's very simplistic. You just multiply it by 3 and then you have billions. So that gives you the order of magnitude. And the other thing is, you know, 20 gigawatts, that's really 20 nuclear power stations, totally clean with free, you know, free fuel. And I think that's a fantastic opportunity. So here, I think this helps us to kind of look at where's the pipeline, and this more complex chart, I think was page 6, John has shared, which has all the developers listed. You know, this is maybe too detailed to really discuss in this forum, but it's a nice list to look up. So if you're a supplier and say, I would like to get a piece of that business, then you can look up who are the developers, when are they building, where are they building, and that then helps to kind of strategize to get in at the right time. Just for illustration, and you know, we created this slide a year ago, and of course it's outdated now. This is a 13 megawatt turbine. A wind turbine from GE, and you just see the size and the impact, and you can only imagine how much technology is in there and how many components mass produced. That's exactly what North Carolina is good at, fit in there. The new generations probably will be more than 20 megawatt turbines. So I think once, you know, in projects being implemented 5-6 years, you know, from now probably will be in that category. So that's a tremendous opportunity. And the same is with the blades. Of course, the bigger the turbine, the bigger the blades have to be to create the efficiency. And what's another advantage is, as you know, that we have a scarcity of lease areas. And with bigger turbines, you can actually squeeze more energy out of a certain acreage. So typically, you know, you can probably get about 5 to 6 megawatts per square kilometers. Excuse me, that's just the European way to calculate it. But I think there's potential that we can have a higher density of power production, which I think has only advantages. It reduces the complexity from permitting point of view, and we have a scarcity of lease areas on the East Coast, and also, you know, a challenge to process and permit these lease areas quick enough. Coming back to the focus on supply chain, this is another tool. Kind of this pie chart illustrates the lifetime cost of a typical 1 gigawatt, 15 megawatt turbine wind farm. And as you, the first thing which you know is really obvious, you see operation and maintenance. The whole left side, it's nearly, you know, it's nearly half of the lifetime cost. And operation maintenance is a long-term local business. I mean, this is a 25 to 30 year cycle, and then it's being repowered, and then you add the next 25 to 30 years. And this is a truly local business. So I think that is a very attractive opportunity, long-term jobs, local jobs. And then on the right side, you see the various scopes. And I think the green section, the balance of plant, that's an area where, you know, to enter that section, you know, there's secondary steel, there is, you know, foundations, there are a lot of components needed to actually install the foundations and then connect with the turbines. Also on the top right, you see the turbine drivetrains, but the blades, as you know, there's a blade finishing plant now just north of us. So these are really the entry steps. And I think we probably would enter in a few steps. You know, we kind of first start with turbine components, which are very shippable, you know, and I think we have a fantastic infrastructure. And that has also some similarities with the automotive industry. So I think that really fits in very well. But there's also a lot of opportunities in IT and control systems and electrical systems. So I think these are all the elements. And I think it is always a challenge to get into that supply chain. But once you're in, then there's kind of a repeat opportunity, and the volume will be tremendous. So that's the other strategy. And then I think the installation, of course, is a very local activity. And I think we'll talk a bit later in those slides about ports. I think that's another key success factor for North Carolina, because you have a few really, really capable ports. And also here, like in the supply chain, everything has turned around. You know, a few years ago, we said, if we only had a pipeline of projects, then we really could plan and do something. Now it's the other way around. Now that the developers say, if we only had more suppliers, if we only had more ports, if we only had more shipyards. So I think, see, it's never balanced. It's always a challenge, this or that way. But I think for North Carolina, now is really the time to fully engage. And I think your task force is exactly the right means to do that. That is a slightly demanding table to read. And, you know, maybe in the Q&A, if there are any difficult questions, Mike Blanche will help us there. But that's what really means. On the left side, you see, you know, the high bars. These are all the scopes where we can compete along the whole East Coast. So, I mean, you can, for example, build a substructure or a substation foundation or switchgear or anything. You can build it here and you can deliver it to any project along the East Coast. And you know, the East Coast right now, if you add up all the state targets, you're at 40 gigawatts, and we know some states probably will increase their targets. So we'll be looking at 50 gigawatts along the East Coast, and all these high bars on the left, you can access, and we can be competitive for that. And then, so that's quite a big percentage of the scope. It's probably about 50% of the whole market. And then, of course, it's a smaller portion on the right side. These are the truly local activities. And yes, this pie is smaller, but this pie is yours guaranteed, because, you know, this is something which has to happen locally. And even though we say here it's 14%, I mean, 14% of $140 billion, that's a big chunk of business opportunity. And I think Governor Cooper said it very well. You know, we have really very aligned advantages of this industry. You know, it makes sense from an environmental point of view. It makes sense from many other points of view, but it also does make business sense. And I think that is really what makes this such an exciting industry. This is kind of showing the table we saw before in the list here, so you kind of can identify, and I think I'm the total on the bottom right. I'm in the way there, whatever that number is. It's a decent number. It's confidential. But I think the key message is that about 30% of all the East Coast projects are in the Maryland, North Carolina, Virginia range, and maybe someday we'll have South Carolina to be added to that. So about 30% of that market is actually in our backyard. And the total market, I mean, this is the roughly 20 gigawatts we looked at before. So it's about, the secret numbers is about 20, and then our share guaranteed with us is about 6. So these are those key numbers. Then John kind of launched the idea that we need to have a supplier database. And we started that database probably a year and a half ago. And I would like just to point out the 2 pie charts. You know, the pie chart on the left shows that more than half of the companies signing up are not North Carolina companies, which I think shows, first of all, that these companies realize how important North Carolina is to be a player here. Secondly, they probably realize it's a fantastic place to do business. And if they want to get a piece of that work, they have to localize. So they will come to North Carolina and look for local business partners, and together try to get a share of that market. So I think that's very positive, because that really adds to the impressive volume you already have. And the pie chart on the right is actually a surprise. It really illustrates that nearly everyone who signed up has some kind of expertise. Either they're onshore wind companies, offshore wind companies, oil and gas companies, ocean energy companies. So I think this is really good news. So we have those industry companies. They actually know a lot about our industry and will help us to build that industry together with all the workforce development and technology advancement combined. This, I think you probably know more about than I do. I just see it's very impressive. And it really is part of the reason why North Carolina is so successful with a high manufacturing GDP, because you thought everything through. You have the logistics, the infrastructure to actually be efficient also on the logistics side. Then the ports. I think also here things changed dramatically. You know, early on we said, oh, let's hope our port is good enough. Now it turned around. The ports, you know, the developers and the tier 1 suppliers are lining up, trying to get a piece of your port and saying, here is some money I would like to invest if you let me in. So I think we got a lot of advantages. And the other thing, totally unscientific, if you just look at these 2 photos, I mean, without doing a fancy analysis, I mean, no one can tell us that this doesn't look like a really powerful industrial base to drive the industry. You know, I think these are very attractive opportunities, very well positioned ports. And it's actually in an area, you know, Kitty Hawk is kind of a special case because it's so close to Hampton Roads. But the rest of the market, in North Carolina, South Carolina, needs ports. And these vessels, you know, installation vessels, they cost, you know, $300,000 a day. So port proximity is very important from a risk mitigation, of course, also cost mitigation point of view, but also risk mitigation, because the shorter the distances, the less you're exposed to weather windows and weather assumptions. It makes you more efficient. We rated the various ports along the East Coast, and I think what is obvious when you look at the photo was also confirmed by our analysis. I think this is very encouraging, and I think it's no coincidence that we're meeting in Wilmington, and we'll have lease areas off the coast very soon. So I think that is really a great perspective for this area and for North Carolina. And this is my last slide about workforce development. I think first of all, we have an enormously powerful workforce ready to go. So there's some areas where we'll have to focus on capacity building because we need more volume because it's a massive new business. And then there are other areas where we say, okay, we need skill building. And this kind of is a generic overview what the typical requirement is for offshore wind. I think Madam Chair made a good comment that we want to learn from, in Europe, a few things went very well, a few things were painful and they learned. We want to bring that in. But at the same time, also, I think we have a strong economy. The US is very strong in building large, complex projects. So we marry those two and really form an American way of building large-scale offshore wind. And I think we have seen a similar development in onshore wind. US was a late entrant in onshore wind, and now I think we have, in terms of production, we're number one worldwide. In terms of capacity installed, we're number two. So that tremendous energy, was really shown in the onshore wind side. And I think in the offshore wind industry, we can do the same. So we will catch up rapidly. And local supply chain will be critical, not only, of course, to maximize local economic benefit, but also there will be a shortage worldwide. And that's kind of my last takeaway. We anticipate globally that in the next 10 years, every year, about 25 gigawatts will be installed worldwide. And last year, it was 6. So we quadruple the global construction activity. And you can imagine how valuable it is if we can, get our local industry focused on that. And, we will be exporting, we can export goods for the global market to get a share even beyond what we just looked at. So these were my thoughts. I'm happy to answer any questions later on. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this great initiative. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be back up in front. And like Andy said, it's nice to be able to remove the mask briefly. And I would just note that I think he's set us up nicely, thinking like we're not too soon of an entrant and we're not too late of an entrant. And I think I've come up with a good way to characterize that. We're going to call us the Goldilocks entrant. I think we can all appreciate that. So put a TM on that. I came up with it. So just to wrap up some of the content that John and Andy set up for us here, some of the major findings that we discovered and learned through the work that BVG and the project team found out were that we have some definite strengths that we need to lean on here in North Carolina and amplify if we're going to be successful with offshore wind, luring the industry, recruiting businesses, recruiting the workforce. First of all, we have that competitive edge in manufacturing, and this should not be a surprise to anybody here. And second of all, Governor Cooper alluded to some of these points earlier this morning. We are a leader in clean energy. We are in the top 5 in solar installations. We were the first state in the Southeast to enact a renewable energy portfolio standard. And I think North Carolina really stands at the top, at least in this region, in this movement. And so I think we can leverage those two things together and really make a strong play for a stronghold in this industry. So I'm going to walk us through a few of those 48 recommendations that came out of that larger supply chain infrastructure and workforce report. But before I do that, I just want to mention that if you take the time to peruse through the report, you'll see that the recommendations themselves are separated out into 3 different phases. And they're separated out as these specifically, whether or not the recommendation would be towards preparing the state towards, which meaning that we'd be focusing on information gathering and formation of policy frameworks or positions that need to be taken in order to take the next step. Another label or another topic includes facilitation, and that includes recommendations that are aimed to create conditions that are conducive to expanding the offshore wind energy industry through removal of policy barriers, enacting new policies that would influence better engagement, and developing favorable infrastructure. And then lastly, there are a suite of recommendations that fall under the category of accelerate. And these are those that would directly support deployment of offshore wind through incentives and state or utility procurements. I think it's worth noting that these categories are not exclusive or not mutually exclusive, excuse me, and that we could adopt any combination of these policies and programs that are articulated in these recommendations from multiple levels at different and the same times and achieve very high outcomes. And so what I would note is, as John said, we're not going to walk you through 48 recommendations. And what we've done, and we've alluded to it earlier throughout our meeting today, that we're going to ask you all to divide up or to self-select yourselves into one of 4 different subcommittees where we really focus intently and robustly on 4 key areas. And the first is going to be on economic opportunity and business development. Listed here are just 3 of the myriad recommendations that fall into either the prepare, facilitate, or accelerate categories as it pertains to economic opportunity and business development. But I would just note that even though there are 48 recommendations that were presented to us, North Carolina and the state and various agencies and entities within, we have already adopted some of those recommendations. We're not coming in cold, and we're not asking all of y'all here today to take them on all on your own. This is a partnership and a coalition of the willing here. The next area is we've pulled subjects around infrastructure, environmental justice, and inclusion. And you can see there 3 recommendations that we would like to address with a subcommittee devoted to that topic. A third is going to be committed to workforce education and training, building the pipeline of our workforce from K through 12 to community colleges and university programming that readies our workforce to support this industry as it blossoms. And then lastly, outreach and engagement. There are a host of opportunities that we can individually and collectively take on together to help promote and engage with our communities, whether they be business communities, local governments, local economic developers, policymakers, and other decision makers, in order to maybe it's just informing them, what is the process? What does the view look like from the coast of one of these big giant projects? And what are the economic opportunities? What kind of job numbers are we talking about in a region or for the state? How do we convey that information? Once we have all that information, what is our strategy for providing it so that we make sure that we continue to grow our coalition of the willing here? And just for y'all, I think it's worth noting that we together, and I have mentioned before, we have already adopted and acted upon several of the recommendations that were in the report. One of them is the very existence of this task force. There was a recommendation to bring together a group of industry and other experts to work on these topics very deliberately. And so here we are. The report also recommended that the state adopt a goal for offshore wind development, which Governor Cooper did when he signed Executive Order 218 last year. And the report also recommended the appointment of several positions across state government. And one of them is the position within the Department of Commerce devoted to clean energy economic development, in which I sit right now. So there are several others that have already been adopted and taken action on. And so look forward to working towards checking the box on several more with y'all. And so that's all where we've been. And I want to take us a little bit from where we've been, where we are right now, and where I think we're going. We've all heard about Executive Order 218 that Governor Cooper signed in June of last year, advancing North Carolina's economic clean energy future with offshore wind, excuse me. In his EO, we've heard several times today that he established a development goal off of our coast for offshore wind energy, 2.8 gigawatts by 2030 and 8 gigawatts by 2040. EO 218 is the codification and the reason why we all are here, taken on the recommendation that came out of the Commerce report, put directly into the executive order to create our task force. And like I mentioned, the report also recommended the designation of key personnel across the state administration to run point on offshore wind. And those included, like I said, this position and the designation of an offshore wind coordinator in both the Department of Environmental Quality and the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. And as we've stated before, offshore wind touches a host of different topics and issues, not only just on the coast, but that are pertinent and need to be considered statewide. And so having touches from all agencies with folks with all manner of regulatory and other jurisdictions is really important to have a robust and thorough knowledge going forward on this topic. I would also note that EO 218 essentially codified that interagency task force on offshore wind that had been meeting pretty routinely over the past several years and identified specifically the Departments of Transportation, the State Ports Authority, Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, Commerce, EDPNC, and Environmental Quality, all aligned under the governor's office to continue that effort and address issues and concerns as they come up. And so we're seeing this continuing push coming from the administration to advance this effort proactively. Whoops, a little heavy with the clicker there. And so I just want to point out that, and y'all met my colleagues here. We've been very well chaired here by Marquita Welton, who's our Chief of Staff at the Department of Commerce and is also serving as our chairperson on this task force. We have a lot of resources in our agency that are ready to commit and have been committed to that are ready to commit and support the work of this task force. We recognize that just one person would not be able to lift this up. It takes a village, quite frankly. And having this task force live under the auspices of the Department of Commerce is really quite an appropriate fit. Our agency's mission is right here on the slide: to improve the economic well-being and quality of life for all North Carolinians. And we work with local, regional, national, and international organizations to help propel economic, community, and workforce developments for the state. And so I think I would be remiss if I didn't just talk a little bit about our agency itself. A lot of folks, I think, rightly associate the Department of Commerce with business recruitment. And I cannot argue that. Last year was a banner year for the agency with, I just want to get my numbers right, more than $10.1 billion announced in capital investment that was accompanied by 24,000 jobs. And so, yes, we are a recruitment agency, and I look forward to seeing what happens this next year ahead. but we're also responsible and have, and make sure, and our responsibility doesn't just extend to that. It goes well beyond. I would note that within the Department of Commerce is the Division of Employment Security, which ensures that unemployment insurance benefits get out to folks in around the state who have been disemployed. We also have a Division of Workforce Solutions whose main mission is to help people find jobs. And that's from, high school graduates all the way to folks who have transitioned or have been laid off and transitioning into different careers. We have a cross-sectional team of analysts and statisticians, try saying that in the middle of the afternoon, who collect data and create data and primary research and report on the state's economy and labor market. That is our Labor and Economic Analysis Division, and all of their work helps to inform our decisions with regards to recruitment, education needs for our workforce, other policies, and career development. We have our Rural Economic Development Division, which boasts a robust team who are responsible for grant programming, providing planning services and analysis, and identification of resources that are needed to help strengthen our rural communities across the state. And then we have John Hardin's team. He is the executive director of the Office of Science, Technology, and Innovation, and his small but nimble team are responsible for really identifying and amplifying new technologies and innovative solutions for budding businesses across the state. And so, yes, we are a business recruitment agency, but we're so much more. And so my colleagues here would be happy to talk with you about any and all of what I've just described. I've got 4 weeks of tenure there, so I can only go about this deep thus far, but I know who to point you to get you any answer to any question that you might have. And so John mentioned at the top of the presentation that, and Andy alluded to this as well, that this offshore wind universe and space is continually changing. Just about 2 weeks ago, the Southeastern Wind Coalition and the organization E2 released a cost-benefit analysis for a modeled 2.8 gigawatt offshore wind project that would be built off of our coast. There were a lot of variables and criteria that went into this assessment, and I've included a hyperlink on the PDF. So when you'll have access to it, you can click directly from the hyperlink when you go there. But I really just wanted to give you all the highlights, the big numbers, quite frankly, because when folks ask, what is the benefit to the offshore wind energy generation premium cost? And so Southeastern Wind looked at what it would cost to upgrade transmission to accommodate 2.8 gigawatts of onshoring energy. What would it take to, in terms of workforce, what kind of jobs are coming in? And so they performed a calculation, and using economic models that have been developed by Department of Energy, the National Renewable Energy Labs, and using data that they retrieved from Duke Energy and others with regards to the state-of-the-art technologies and time of use and avoided costs and power purchase agreements, a whole host of variables went into this. And what they determined is on a 2030 base case scenario, using the inputs that come with the base model that was evaluated, that the net economic impact of a 2.8 gigawatt project off the coast of North Carolina would generate between $3.78 billion in economic development. And that would correspond to over 27,000 job years over the course of construction and installation of such a project. And then once it's in operation, 923 ongoing jobs over the life of the operation of that project, which Andy alluded to before, 25 to 30 years. And that doesn't even consider repowering and keeping it up for beyond that expected life. In a high scenario, which modeled local content shares for North Carolina based on the study that BVG and team put out. We found that there is a true potential for local providers to support an offshore wind project by supplying 100% of the blades manufactured here in North Carolina and manufacturing of offshore substations. And so when you add that local content into the model, you get your high scenario. And what that looks like is $4.58 billion in economic investment, just under 31,000 job years for construction and installation, and then that same 923 jobs ongoing for operations and maintenance. And so these are not small numbers, and it is an overall benefit to the state. Excuse me. Southeastern Wind Coalition and E2 also analyzed what the benefits would be if they layered on top the extension of the ITC out beyond 2025, and the number goes up because obviously less capital and cost and investment on the part of the developer. If they're able to take advantage of some tax credits, the number goes up. They also evaluated some environmental impacts or benefits, if you would, if we were to apply a price on carbon through the social cost of carbon. And what does that look like? It would also increase the benefits to the state. And so really, any which way you slice it, building offshore wind from North Carolina will and should yield a net economic benefit. So we've talked a little bit about our wind energy areas, and I think for those of you who might be newer to this offshore wind universe, I just think it's important to identify for you what exactly and where exactly we're talking about them. And how do we get to that 2.8 gigawatts and 8 gigawatts of offshore wind development in the next 18 years? Sorry, I had to do the quick math. So right now we have two wind energy areas off of our coast. We have the Kitty Hawk wind energy area, which is off of Corolla to the northeast. And Ashley McLeod is here. She represents Avangrid, which is the company that holds that area under lease. And I'm sure she would be able to speak in a whole lot more detail than I could right now. But the development of that project is well underway. We'll leave it at that. We also have Wilmington East, which is that blue polygon down just south of where you see Oak Island on the map. And that area has been slated for lease auction by the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management for later this spring. And between the two polygons of area that could be under lease by the middle of this year, there's a potential generating capacity of 4 gigawatts. And that's significant. Like Andy said, you can think a gigawatt is a nuclear power station. And so we're building 4 nuclear plants off the coast, potentially, hopefully. And then, so how do we get to 8 gigawatts if we only have those two areas currently identified? Well, one of the recommendations coming out of this report was move as quickly as possible to identify new areas for potential leasing and development. And in the middle of last year, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management came up with a timeline for doing just that. I don't think any of us had mentioned throughout this day that the Biden administration made a significant announcement regarding offshore wind back in March of last year, indicating that they were driving for 30 gigawatts of development by 2030 off the coast of the United States. And so our 8 gigawatts will definitely lend into that overall national goal. And so, if we're going to get to that 30 gigawatts, we have to develop the pipeline that we already have and then some, because I believe that the ultimate goal for the administration is 50 gigawatts by 2040. Someone might want to check my memory. I don't trust it these days anymore. And so what BOEM did, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, is they came up with a timeline for identifying new areas. And if I can get this to work, right here, we are part of what's known as the Central Atlantic area. And what BOEM has done is they have designated North Carolina from about Hatteras Island north, combined with the entire coastlines of Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware as what's now known as the Central Atlantic Task Force, where we will go all the way back to about the beginning when BOEM will pre-identify potential areas for new development and work with representatives from all 4 states to deconflict them, identify where there might be problematic areas, and identify new areas for potential wind development. And then here's that timeline. I would also note that North Carolina is also a member of Carolina Long Bay, which is southern shores of North Carolina, along with the northern shores of South Carolina, which you have to make sure you keep straight in your head because you could get mixed up like I often do. And it's Carolina Long Bay here that is slated to go to lease. It's the Wilmington East wind energy area that's slated to go to lease later on this spring. And so you can see that that is definitely on the near horizon. And BOEM is projecting leasing areas once they become identified and fully vetted sometime looks like 2023 for additional areas off the East Coast. And so this is where we're looking, and this is where the opportunity lies. And I think that's it. So we've got a lot of names and contact information up here. But John and Andy and I are happy to answer any questions in the time that we have remaining, Marquita. And Mike Blanche is on the line with us as well to field any particular questions that are specific to the report. And so thank you all so much for your attention. And Marquita, I'll turn it back over to you as chair.
We're open for questions from the panel.
I've got a question. Can you folks hear me?
Yep.
Hey, Mark McIntyre with Duke Energy. Thanks so much for all of that great information, all 3 of you. Jennifer, you mentioned lease areas identified perhaps for auction in the 23 timeframe. It brings to mind the pending moratorium, and I would love it if any of you could sort of opine on the status of that and, you know, the chances of it not happening.
I don't know if you want me to opine, because I can opine a whole lot. Thanks, Mark. So for a little bit of level setting, for those of you who might not be aware, in the waning months of President Trump's administration, he enacted a presidential memorandum that essentially creates a moratorium on the leasing. I'm going to be very clear about the leasing of new wind energy areas off the North Carolina coast beginning July 1st of this year. And so I don't know what the disposition of that is. We are pressing forward with all of our activities as though that moratorium will go into place on July 1st, which to my mind, I think would be very unfortunate. However, we are on track to go to lease auction for the Wilmington East area later this spring and hopefully have contracts signed and leases executed by 11:59 p.m. on June 30th, meaning the Wilmington East development can proceed. So what I didn't mention earlier is that the effort and the research and the work that goes into identifying those very particular looking polygons off the coast takes a really long time. For those of you who have been in this space as long as I have, and maybe longer, might be familiar with the task force work that was done that identified those areas. And that began back in the early 2010s. And so here we are 10 years later, and we're just now getting around to leasing one of those polygons. And so if the moratorium is to go into effect, I think what we as North Carolina could do is use that quiet time, if you will, for leasing, but doing all that we can to learn and research and deconflict all of the areas necessary, get all of our stakeholders on the same page, iron out any concerns, address issues, and proceed forward such that July 1st, 2032, we can ask BOEM to hold an auction. and get right on about the business of developing more areas. I'm hopeful. I don't know what the outcome will be, but I'm hopeful that sometime between now and July 1st, 2032, that moratorium will either be lifted or repealed. And that would require an action of Congress. Thanks for the question, Mark. Madam Chair.
Guess, yeah. Hi, Dave Glass. I don't sense, maybe I'm missing something here. It's something I don't know anything about, but I never hear about the grid. It's great to produce all this power, but there seems to be a real problem about what happens when it hits the shore. Is anybody working on that? And is that included in this task force?
Or Mark McIntyre.
Yes.
So that's a great question, and it's one that we think about every day. Honestly, we've been thinking about grid from the standpoint of resilience and accommodating the clean energy transition for years. So it's a great comment. There is an organization, the Transmission Planning Collaborative in North Carolina, that has been thinking about transmission needs, irrespective of offshore wind, but now inclusive of offshore wind for years. And indeed, there was a study that actually sort of came out of work that we were doing as part of the Clean Energy Plan process. There was a small group of us sitting around the table one day, and I think it was in EDF's office before the world shut down in March of 2020, talking about the clean energy transition and the need to study transmission investment needs, particularly if we start interconnecting large amounts of intermittent resources like offshore wind. And so coming out of that was a study conducted by the Transmission Planning Collaborative that looks at transmission investment needs to accommodate all this energy. So the answer is yes, there are a lot of folks thinking about it. I don't have, really specifics in front of me right now relative to the work that they did, but it's out there. And we can certainly dig it up and make it available to all the task force members if it would be appropriate.
And for the record, please state your name when asking a question. Andy, you wanted to comment to that?
If I may,
please.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, very good. Yeah, I just wanted to congratulate for that question, because it's a very prudent question. We need, even though everything's so promising, we need to look forward and see where are the hurdles ahead of us. And some of these hurdles are very long, have very long lead time to resolve. Because on the grid, I mean, we always talk about the interconnection per se, basically to be able to connect to a substation. I think that's a well-known problem, but and I'm sure that will be resolved. But the other challenge is, how do we get, how do we cross the beaches? How do we get under bridges into the load centers? And I think that is really why the industry is now, and New Jersey actually has, as the first state, launched this solicitation for a planned grid, that you really can optimize, that we're not wasting valuable space, how we can bring cables to shore, that we optimize this in a planned approach. So that's a big challenge. And I think North Carolina will play a very big role, because Hitachi Energy is one of your anchor companies, and that's really their field, which HVDC technology, where you basically have only a fraction of the number of cables coming to shore. So I think this is where we need long-term planning. And in addition to that, we're experiencing a worldwide shortage of those components. So, I mean, for planning purposes, make sure we don't sub-optimize for a certain project and then forgo great opportunities to scale up in terms of being environmentally prudent, commercially efficient. So I think a planned grid approach is something we should look at in most states and tackle that now. And I fully support what you have said on that. But thank you for bringing that up. It's, it's actually, I'm now working on the transmission side since half a year. Very, very passionate to talk about this. So I yield back to the lead.
Thank you. Do we have other questions for the panel? Ashley?
You need to. You need to pull the lever up toward you to turn the mic on.
Perfect. How's that? Okay, great. No one has ever told me that. And I'm a singer. So anyway, my point or my comment, it's not really a question, but more of a comment on what you all presented and what Andy just actually mentioned, and back to Jennifer as well. So it's one of the things I've learned in doing outreach to stakeholders is the not understanding of how long this takes to do all of this. To Jennifer's point, that was started back in 2009-10. And even in my previous employment working with Virginia, to be able to go in and determine what that wind energy area was going to look like. So, and making sure it didn't get in the way of shipping lanes and the military exercises and different things like that. So it is important that we all recognize how long it's going to take. I had a nice conversation with Carteret County Community College too, just going and explaining those steps for workforce development, because people can actually, get certified right now, GWO certified, but the jobs aren't there here right now. That doesn't mean that they possibly can't go up and work on one of the projects in northern part of the coast. But it's important that we're building towards this. And I think and I like you called it kind of a quiet period. That's not horrible, because to Andy's point of some of the things not being here, getting the manufacturing here, all of those things, this region really has that quiet pause of sorts to really do it well as we're trying to improve the grid as well. And we do need to be speaking to our congressmen and senators as well for that. So.
Justin?
Thank you. No, I was just going to add that I think these types of forward-looking questions are exactly the types where the UK can hopefully be of assistance as well, given that the UK has tread this path already in many ways. And so happy to be a resource, has been mentioned already, and hopefully make some relevant connections.
Do we have other questions for the panel?
Could I contribute? Is that okay?
Yes.
Hi, good to see you all, and sorry I can't be with you, but on one level it's a good thing because I haven't actually committed any carbon. My carbon input to the meeting is very low, which is the world it's moving to. I wanted to pick up on a couple of things. One is generally the industry, and Andy alluded to it, the industry is a bit panicked by bottlenecks at the moment. And that creates an amazing advantage, because what manufacturers tend to want to do, or wind turbine, let's say, wind turbine suppliers, because they're really integrators, they'd like to have some form of activity in every state that they are supplying, because every state wants to have local content. And so that creates a bit of a pull for certainly North Carolina to exploit its manufacturing expertise. There's a pecking order of the different types of things that wind turbine suppliers have, and it starts with things that are packageable or big. So things like towers, because wind turbine manufacturers used to own tower companies, but have given that up. So they are happy for others to do that for the right standards, of course. Blades is one other thing which you can package up. The real thing that had quite a big slice of spend is the turbine. And I think the biggest challenge here is, how do you convince a turbine manufacturer to let manufacturing out of what is essentially Europe? And I think that's the big prize to go for. And of course, that doesn't depend on anything to do with lease areas. It's something you can go for full stop. And I think there are just a finite number of people who will ultimately make those decisions. Andy said quite rightly that the market's going up from 6 gigawatts a year to 25 gigawatts a year. So various people are in pain about trying to make decisions about where the next factory will be. So it's not a question of will there be a next factory, it's where it will be. So I think one of the key recommendations, and one that I think it's really essential to focus on, is making those contacts with the potential manufacturers, those people who are the decision makers.
Thank you, Mike. Again, Mike was one of the partners who helped produce the report that John, Jennifer, and Andy just gave for us. Do we have other questions from the task force? Any of our virtual members? Do we have any questions from our virtual members?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, recognizing Glenn Skinner.
Yes, ma'am. I know this is kind of our inaugural meeting, and I'm just curious at what point in this process we would discuss impacts to existing industries like the fishing industry and how this type of development has impacted marine life, protected species, and those types of things in Europe and areas where they've had this for several decades.
So could I answer that one? Largely in the UK, we've seen a really real positive impact. There hasn't been a big clash, and indeed, I think when we look at places like Maine getting very concerned about lobsters, we are slightly puzzled for a number of reasons. One, wind farms have tended to actually improve the marine environment. They've stopped people dredging. They've stopped people fishing in unsustainable ways. They've actually created spawning areas for certain species, of course. So we actually see, when we look at Maine, we get very puzzled as to why there is such concern, because we don't believe it's real. Now, clearly people have concerns, and that's very important. The other thing that it's helped do is places like Grimsby on the east coast of England was one of these areas where, you know, time had forgotten. It had a great fishing history, and it had really gone downhill. It was a really an area in real trouble. It's been completely regenerated through offshore wind activity. Completely regenerated. It's got its pride back. It's got lots of jobs. It's really looking at a really smart place. So I think it's important to get, you know, there are impacts, but it's important to realize that offshore wind is actually offering something very positive as well. And I think I get puzzled why people are so concerned, but there's concerns and they have to be addressed. But there is this wider issue. You know, if climate change is a rather horrible thing coming down the road that will hit us, that will damage all manner of things, and we know that. So if you take one species like the right whale, you might be very concerned about that. But climate change is going to threaten a lot of species, and offshore wind is one way, and there aren't that many, of tackling the inherent problem of high carbon emissions. So there's a bigger picture here, and that I think should help temper worries. But I still think, you know, offshore wind doesn't create the impacts that some people would, or negative impacts that some people would like you to believe.
Madam Chair, if I could add a little bit to that to speak to Mr. Skinner's question about
Please.
outreach and engaging with those communities and particular stakeholder interests. I would just note that going into the development of those polygons, the federal agencies, they consult, or I should say the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management consults with all of its sister federal agencies, as well as the analogs in the states, to make sure that any impacts are going to either be mitigated or minimized to the extent practicable to protect species of all walks and swims of life, if you will. And once an area is held under lease, and I would encourage either Hayes or Ashley, who recommend the developer side of the house here, once those areas are held under lease, there are stipulations that are set out in those lease agreements that direct the developers to continually and ongoing engage, particularly with fisheries interests and other local stakeholders, to ensure that information is communicated and any activities are made known to them so that folks can work together. It's not the end of the process. It's certainly an ongoing and continual process. Mike.
We have to turn on every time. Okay, gotcha. All right. I thought they were turning it off over there. Is that if you go to our website, we actually have every notice to fisheries that goes out. That way, we send them and distribute them to all the marinas along the coast from Virginia all the way down. And we have all those connections, work with Trish, who I know is I think is on the line here. Lots of those kind of things. I know Bob and our fishery liaison folks have visited, and so we have designees that way. And I'm sure Hayes will jump in too, but it was really telling to go, and I can bring and offer some of the examples and slides where we can show like how much trawling has actually been done in our wind energy area. And so it helps us, and actually it's been fun because we've learned a lot of things. Some of this, it's wonderful that we've been able to record some of these frankly just old guys that are out there, and they know what's happening and what they catch when and where, and so it's really the coordinates, and so it's actually been kind of fun to learn that kind of information as well. So Hayes, I don't know if you have anything to chime in with.
The only thing I would add with respect to this particular task force is, does this fit within one of the subcommittees? Does this fit in the outreach and engagement subcommittee? Does it fit in the infrastructure and environmental justice and inclusion committee? So maybe that's a question that can be talked about in the summary, whether or not that particular issue fits in the charges of these, or if it fits more.
And it may have some overlap in more than one subcommittee.
Yeah, or it obviously has overlap between this task force and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the ongoing activities of developers who already have lease areas like Avangrid in the
Right.
Gulf.
And really, to be honest, outreach should be in every single one of these, but I'm sure we'll figure that part out.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Glenn. Do we have other questions?
This is Trish Murphy.
Please proceed.
Yeah, it's more of a statement. I think how Avangrid was handled was great. I think they did really very good outreach to the fishermen. I think Wilmington East might be a little bit more problematic because that area does have live bottom. It's home for lots of snappers and groupers. And I think as long, we really need to be aware of the needs of both the recreational and the commercial industry with that. And I think the outreach will be very important, and bringing those industries into the discussion early will be really important, because what I've seen up north, some of the fisheries folks up north have not been as pleased with some of BOEM's stuff up there. So hoping we're learning from up north to do a great job with working with our fishing industry down here.
Thank you for that, Trish. And I'm going to implore Jennifer, as you're closer to the screen, I know I have glasses on, but I still can't see that far. Do we have any other hands raised for questions? Whit. Right
Yeah,
now.
Marquita, I'd like to also just say, I think the tourism industry in the state, as we realize we're the 5th most visited state in the country, and it's a $26 billion industry for the state. I think outreach will be tremendously important for them as we talk about those impacts. And I do think it's every aspect of what's going on here will need to be in that outreach to keep the message accurate and up to date, so people know what's going on and what it will mean for them. So I think that's going to be a big key for this group going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, may I say
Yes,
something
hi.
about tourism?
Greg Andick with National Audubon Society. Just want to piggyback on a couple of the comments earlier. In a lot of ways, thinking about the bottlenecks to the industry, it's one thing to deliver the economic development and the magnitude of that. It's another thing around timing, and lots of things I think we're coming to here affect the timing, things like transmission, and siting issues, and certainly impacts on fisheries and wildlife from the bird perspective are very important to us. So I would really encourage this group to kind of think holistically about how do we make sure that we can really get these projects delivered on time, and certainly things like some of the wildlife and fisheries concerns are things that I think this group can help support in thinking about how do we make sure some of those issues are resolved. And then, of course, there's also activities outside of this task force. Audubon's a member of the Offshore Wind for North Carolina Coalition, which is a mix of environmental and business interests. And folks are grappling with many of those same questions. So I appreciate the the comments folks have made earlier on that topic, and certainly something we echo as well.
Thank you, Greg. Kevin?
Yeah, hey, hello. Yeah, Kevin Lackey, Brunswick County. For the developers, just a quick curiosity question. You have these three blade designs. Are there any other more efficient type, as in perhaps a single blade? And you're talking about, bird interruption and other things. I know there's a single vertical blades that could be more efficient, less efficient. I'm not sure. I just don't know if this is the design everybody does, so it's just what's accepted, or perhaps there's other options. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I can answer that one if you like.
I am certainly not an engineer, but there are other technologies that are being looked at. The three blade design is at this point the most efficient and effective, not only from a resource capture standpoint, but also from a cost and commercialization standpoint. So when we think about technologies moving from research and development to commercialization, there is that cost curve, and the three blade design is well down that curve in terms of cost effectiveness.
Okay, I want to thank everyone for your questions and comments, and we will have more time for that later. We are a little bit behind our schedule right now, so I'm going to go ahead and cut our break to 5 minutes, and we'll return, and you'll have an opportunity to continue the conversation. If I may say one more thing, please, as you're breaking, you heard Jennifer Munt mentioned earlier the Southeast Wind Coalition's visualization study. They were kind enough to set up their visualization project in our room. Presenters ready? Economic Opportunity and Business Development Subcommittee.
Madam Chair, is this supposed to be a sales job or is this just the facts?
We probably need a little bit of both, John.
Okay. Well, hopefully the content on this slide just sells itself. But what the staff has done and with oversight and assistance from Madam Chair is to say, how do we take this big space of offshore wind and divide it up into kind of meaningful workspaces? And so one of the obvious ones that rose to the top is the one that just has to do with economic opportunity and business development. And that's broadly defined, really kind of the supply chain. There's some workforce aspects, but there's another subcommittee that deals with that. But when in the presentation, you may have seen that there were 3 recommendations out of the 48 recommendations that were in this subcommittee. That does not mean that those are the 3 recommendations that this subcommittee will absolutely address. Those simply were for example purposes, having to do with the prepare, facilitate, and accelerate framework. This is a broader kind of articulation of what this task force or this subcommittee would do. And the goal here is for each of us to describe the 4 subcommittees and then for you all to kind of self-select onto these. And generally that self-selection process works out very nicely where people are able to work on things that they care most about and know most about. And so this is about how do we, better articulate our advantages and priorities kind of from a marketing standpoint, for example. How do we take the existing companies, that huge manufacturing base in the state, and if all we did was help a large share of them pivot to this new opportunity, that would be huge. Just that kind of pivoting exercise, growing from within. But there's also a huge recruitment, opportunity as well, both internationally and from other states. And so we haven't done that before in this space. And so we need some help. We need some input from you all on what's the best, most efficient way to do that. What are some ways that perhaps our universities or inventors could develop and commercialize technologies that are going to be important for this space? I mean, that may not be a big focus of this committee, but it could be something that it focuses on. And so you can see all the topics that we could consider. These are not set in stone. These may not be comprehensive, but these are just meant to stimulate ideas. And if any of these things look interesting to you, then we would be happy to have you join this subcommittee. The people staffing the subcommittee would be myself and then Colin Kaiser from the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina. Even though I've been in commerce for almost 19 years now, I'm not an economic developer in the same sense that Colin is. I'm more of a strategy policy person. And so what Colin brings to the table is that, boots on the ground, helping recruit companies, helping existing companies tool to a new industry. And so both of us together will help, staff this. And Colin, do you have any comments? Yeah, Colin would like to. Okay, go ahead.
Again, Colin Kaiser, EDPNC. One thing it's up here, but just to put a pin in this is that it's not going to be a standard recruitment operation of, hey, just come on to North Carolina. These things will happen. A certain amount of companies will land here because of our industrial ecosystem, workforce, et cetera, logistics. But with a focus on equity and making sure that communities and even size of companies that have been left out of large industrial and sectoral developments are included in this, we need people that have deep roots and connectivity throughout North Carolina. It's easy to think, okay, it's going to be Hitachi Power Grids. Yes, of course they're going to be involved. There are large metallurgical companies that are going to be involved. We want to see the small and mid-sized businesses that have been working with making diesel Cummins engines in Rocky Mount. We want to be in front of them and say, hey, internal combustion engines are going away. Your business is changing. Let's talk about offshore wind opportunities. That's one example. But this is not just a paint by numbers recruitment initiative. We want to think strategically about how we can reach communities and companies, both geographically and demographically, to get into this supply chain. And that's going to be difficult because I've never done it before, to be frank. And I don't think any of us have done that specifically. That's why it's exciting. And that's why we need your involvement and your creativity and strategy along with us. So thank you.
Thank you, John and Colin. And Colin hit on a very important point. This is not just about large tier one companies when we think about these towers, but we're talking about tier one, tier two, tier three companies. We want to reach and make sure that everybody has an opportunity for benefiting here. So this committee is going to be very important for our ensuring that our small and underserved communities and businesses have opportunities in this space. Jennifer and Dana Magliola will be the liaisons for the infrastructure subcommittee.
There we go. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And those comments that y'all just made, both you and Colin, I think were a perfect segue to this next subcommittee topic area, where we've put together issues and discussion of infrastructure, EJ, and inclusion all together, because we recognize that offshore wind, the development, the manufacturing, the installation, it will necessarily have an impact structurally on communities potentially, and we need to make sure that we do that with as little or mitigate those impacts to the extent practical that we can. You all might be aware, and Governor Cooper mentioned it this morning, that he signed Executive Order 246 earlier, just at the start of this year, which he mentioned, puts us on a glide path for the transportation sector to mitigate climate change. But also implicit in that were several sections and stipulations regarding equity and addressing environmental injustices that have been ongoing across the state for centuries. And one of the things that we are all tasked with as members of his administration, each agency has to identify and incorporate concepts of environmental justice, equity, and inclusion in all of the work that we do. And so you see threads of that here as for work of this subcommittee to ensure that we are not only making sure that we minimize impacts to the environment at large, but we also minimize impacts and create benefits and opportunities to communities that might not have had access to them heretofore. And so what I envision with this subcommittee, and I hope that you will be interested in joining this, what I think will be really important work, are opportunities and a charge to research, evaluate, and make recommendations regarding a transmission and offshore wind related infrastructure that foster environmental justice and provide for equitable access. And that's just very broad. And I think it's incumbent upon us as members of the subcommittee to decide exactly what does that mean and what are the goals and the outcomes that we want to strive to achieve, and what are the metrics that will get us there. I think in big picture, we'd be looking to identify and prioritize actions that address opportunities and challenges both, review and identify best practices that foster environmental justice and equitable access. And I think that, that might involve doing some key research in other states where they've been taking, I'm thinking New Jersey, New York, California, and others that have taken some aggressive moves to incorporate concepts of environmental justice and equity in procurement for offshore wind projects. And then identify organizations and other entities with which we can partner to help champion the outcomes that we want to achieve. There are several topics that I envision considering and discussing in much further detail. And again, this is just to whet your appetite and encourage your participation. But I think that we can do a lot of really good work by addressing these components here. And as Ashley mentioned before, she sees a need for outreach and engagement and advocacy to be thread into all of the subcommittee's work. I would echo that, but I think these concepts need to be thought of in the other subcommittees as well. And so we'll work in a smaller group and then hopefully share and, build a tapestry all together. So that's my pitch. I hope you'll join Dana and me. And I don't know if folks said yet, but we intend to meet once a month. We're not going to overload y'all with meetings. How rude. Excuse me. And on the months that the task force convenes, we'll build out time during that meeting date for the subcommittees to break out and convene. So you're not asked to meet more than once that month. Dana, you have something to contribute, please?
Thank you, Dana and Jennifer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Turn it over to Emily.
Hi again, everybody. Emily Roach from Commerce. Before I give a brief overview of the Workforce Subcommittee, I also wanted to take a moment and mention that last summer, the department did release the State Strategic Economic Development Plan, the First in Talent Plan that I bet many of you have seen before, but the recommendations from the Offshore Wind Supply Chain Report are included in the First in Talent Plan. So we do encourage you to view that strategic plan that's available on the department's website as well. Also, I just wanted to take a moment. I should have mentioned it in my introduction earlier, but before I joined state government, I did spend some time in education and was a science teacher and wrote elementary science curriculum. So the opportunity to work with you all to develop recommendations that could influence the next generation of scientists and clean energy experts is exciting to me. So thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity. The Workforce Subcommittee, our mission is to research, evaluate, and make recommendations regarding policies and programs that will grow a diverse and competitive North Carolina offshore wind workforce. So first, we will evaluate the offshore wind workforce development challenges and opportunities. We've heard many of them today, and we'll definitely use the Offshore Wind Supply Chain Report as a tool to do just that. Then we will identify policies and programs to foster a diverse and highly skilled offshore wind workforce. Jennifer did just mention that oftentimes women and people of color are underrepresented in the clean energy occupations. And so we'll explore policies to make sure that the workforce is truly representative of our state's population. And finally, we will foster partnerships among the educational institutions, businesses, trades, and stakeholders that are best equipped to really move us forward and to implement the recommendations that this task force endorses. I should note that I am, eager to staff this subcommittee, and we will, of course, leverage the resources and expertise of the Division of Workforce Solutions that's housed within the Department of Commerce and the NC Works Commission. So, thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Lex? Next slide, please.
All right. Hello again, everyone. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Lex Janes. I'm the Legislative Affairs Director for the North Carolina Department of Commerce. I'll be the staff liaison for the Outreach and Engagement Subcommittee. I had a little spiel planned, but Governor Cooper, when he was here, as he is, want to do, really got to the heart of what we're doing here much better than I could have when he said, what we'll be doing as the task force as a whole is taking the new ideas and new strategies that are developed here and then taking them and advocating for them. And so really what we're going to be doing is that advocacy work, identifying and engaging stakeholders that will advocate for the policies that prioritize offshore wind development here in the state of North Carolina. That will be driven by your decisions and your actions as the subcommittee members, as has been mentioned with the other groups, whether that's promoting recommendations from other subcommittees or the task force as a whole, making connections amongst governments and organizations, building partnerships, whether building upon existing partnerships, such as smart power, which has been discussed, or looking into exploring new partnerships. And I think what Ashley and Whit mentioned earlier is really relevant about how, as Jennifer was saying, how the work of this committee is really going to be interwoven into the work of all of the committees, and it's going to be crucial for anyone involved with the outreach and engagement to have knowledge of what the other committees are doing, what they're working on, how they're messaging, so that we can stay consistent to put our best foot forward when advocating for these policies and doing outreach. Who that will go to, any number of entities. We know that, state government has a large stake. All of us at the Department of Commerce, our fellow cabinet agencies, the General Assembly, other Council of State offices. If there's anything that requires interaction with the federal government, we've got a great Washington office up there run by the legendary Jim McCleskey will be a great resource for anything we need. Local governments, I was really happy to see Mayor Sappho here today. I know we can really engage with local governments and tell them about the benefits of the economic development and jobs that this can bring to their communities. Also, folks outside of government, whether that's advocacy groups, many of which are represented here today, business interests, really anyone that this committee thinks should be engaged, we will make those connections and put that best foot forward. There isn't as much of a research aspect to this as some of the other committees, but we do have an opportunity through some identification through Dr. Hardin's office. There have been similar efforts both in the wind sphere or clean energy generally in some other places, and we can take a look at some of their best practices and how they have really advocated for the policies they've wanted to do. So if you are interested in outreach and engagement, we'd certainly encourage you to join this committee. And I think the one perk that we'll have, for my little selling point is indeed that you will really be knowledgeable about the work that all of the committees are doing as you're spreading that message. So thank you.
Thank you, Lex. You've heard the best pitches from all four. Hey. And don't feel like you only have to pick one. You can serve on more than one task force if you want, more than one subcommittee. And those members who are here in person, you see this QR code on the table. You can scan this. It'll have the information for the task force for you to fill out your first choice and second choice, because we want to make sure that each committee has good representation, and you may not get your first choice, which may be natural to you, but we hope that you will be willing to serve as needed where needed. Also, our members who are with us virtually, if you don't have this information already, it will be sent to you, and we ask that you to be thinking about which subcommittee you want to serve on. Also, if you may be interested in chairing that subcommittee, please note that on your response. Do we have any questions for the? Okay. All right. Someone's. Okay. Okay. Right. So we don't want to, we really, really value that you are willing to give your time to this, and we don't want to overimpose on you. We know we're already imposing, but we don't want to take advantage of that. So again, the subcommittees will meet monthly, but during the months that our regular meetings are scheduled, we will not, you'll meet as a part of the regular meeting, or you won't meet that month. So we won't ask you to meet twice in a month. Okay? All right. Steve?
Yes, Madam Chair. There may be certain subcommittees where my personal expertise is different than the expertise of others within my organization. Is there any interest or need in having us volunteer staff from our organizations to support these subcommittees.
I will say that we welcome all willing participants. And there may be a need for ad hoc committees from the subcommittee. So certainly we're open to inviting other talent and expertise and skills. So if you know someone who might be interested, as you form your subcommittees, if there are particular areas of interest that you feel we need to develop an ad hoc committee for, certainly we can do that. Do we have any other questions?
Madam Chair, I would just echo that.
Hayes?
I would just echo that if there are desires to pull in expertise, even if we're not on a committee, like if I'm not on a committee, but there's expertise within my organization for a different committee that maybe can be brought to bear and could be valuable, we certainly would welcome the opportunity to be called out to provide that, or at least have that as an offer.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Do we have any other questions about the subcommittees? All right, so we're going to open it up to open remarks or comments from the task force. Does anyone have any questions or comments they'd like to make at this time? Steve?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. First of all, I just wanted to say again, thank you for the opportunity to serve on this task force. I can't tell you how important, as somebody who's been working in the clean energy space for 30 years and watching all of this kind of evolve, this is such an important opportunity for the state, and I'm really pleased to be here. There were a couple of thoughts that I had as I was watching today's events progress that I just wanted to highlight as things that I think this task force might want to look at a little bit. The first one, and I happened to be sitting next to Mark McIntyre, my good friend from Duke Energy, who I saw in a presentation, what was it, last week we were talking about the carbon reduction plan. And one of the things that was very striking in the discussion of the carbon reduction planning process that's going on right now at the utilities and at the commission is as they look at future resources available to achieve that goal. And one of the things that came up in that meeting was there's a gap between about 2035 and 2045 where offshore wind kind of disappears from the chart. And that is a real problem in terms of being able to achieve these carbon reduction goals that we're facing as a state right now, and frankly, facing as a planet right now. It seems that that gap, is a direct result of some of the things that we've discussed here today with regard to the moratorium and with regard to, the lack of wind energy areas that are currently available for planning at that stage of the game. Basically, we will develop out what we already have identified, and then we've got a gap that we face in order to achieve the state goal, the carbon reduction goals, and many other things. And so whatever this group can do to help address that, I think is very important, especially if you look at North Carolina as having the largest technical potential for wind on the East Coast, actually almost as large as the rest of the East Coast combined. And then you look at the map that showed the wind energy areas that are currently available with two tiny little boxes on either end of North Carolina's coastline. And then you look at the Northeast where it's basically all peach. It does seem that the first round that BOEM went through may have been a little more restrictive on us than it was on other regions of the East Coast. And so perhaps there is something to explore there. A second item that came up was there are a lot of other technologies that we probably haven't talked about explicitly that are really important for this. We did touch on the issue of transmission, and transmission is important not only for offshore wind, but also for solar in the eastern part of the state. Basically, we've got a lot of resources and we need to get it to where the people are. To get the power to the people, we need a lot of transmission investment, and that's certainly something we should be exploring. But another one that didn't get discussed as much was storage. One of the things that's really important is to take wind resources and solar resources, intermittent resources, and try to make them less intermittent. North Carolina has a real opportunity as you extend down the supply chain from offshore wind into these, I'll call them adjacent technologies. And the Toyota battery factory that was just recently announced is an example of that opportunity, but it extends from batteries into some new technology that's rolling out in the space of, for example, green hydrogen and other types of long-term storage. So that's something that maybe we want to look at as well. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on was just the workforce piece. There's a lot of discussion about what we can do and how we don't do too much too quickly, but at the same time are ready when the time comes. And, you know, workforce kind of splits into the wind specific conversation. Let's go out and build things and play in the water. Play in the water, that maybe is trivializing a little bit. I apologize to my development friends. There you go, there you go. Versus just the manufacturing piece and the supply chain, which really, at some point, as you work your way down into tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, you lose the fact that this is wind and it's just manufacturing. And both of those things are actually really important, but our strength historically is in that second part, in manufacturing. And so I don't want us to lose track of the fact that there's a lot of manufacturing that's going to come out of this conversation that is different than talking about the wind jobs that are going to be created. That said, we're already doing work with North Carolina A&T and a whole bunch of other stakeholders around the state, the apprenticeship NC program and others, looking at apprenticeship programs around offshore wind. There's a pilot program already in place that's focused on solar and weatherization. They want to expand that into offshore wind. And so we're looking at a good job solicitation proposal in that space under the U.S. Department of Commerce EDA program. So those kinds of things are already out there. And then I note that we've got Michelle Query and other representatives from the community college system that are involved. And every community college that I've spoken to about this is super excited about it. So I think we really are well situated for the workforce, but there's a lot to do and a lot to balance in terms of the front end versus the back end and the manufacturing versus the wind specific.
Absolutely. Thank you for those comments. And Ashley mentioned earlier the time, because these projects don't just come up overnight. It's years in the making, but we can't afford to wait. We have to start now to get our workforce prepared and also preparing our businesses to be able to meet the demand for us that's going to be needed. All right. Do we have other questions or comments? Any of our members virtual? Any of our virtual members have any questions or comments? Wow, well, we get right back on time pretty quickly, huh? Well, listen, what I want to say is I really thank each of you for your commitment and your willingness to serve in this very important work. It's a lot of potential for this state, a lot of potential jobs, a lot of potential capital investment. We're not just talking about the big manufacturers. Again, the opportunity extends from the small town caterer who will have to service the workers who go out offshore to stay on these platforms for extended periods of times, to transportation, to all kinds of supplies. You name it, whatever you need for business is going to be needed in this industry as well. So there's a great potential for our state, for our small businesses, and certainly we want to be mindful of being as inclusive and outreaching as much as we can to make sure that we communicate and that we prepare our businesses, our workforce for this opportunity to advance offshore wind energy in North Carolina. Do we have any more comments before we move to closing up? Right, this is your last chance. So again, I want to thank you. But before we leave, I do want to mention again the Southeast Wind Coalition. If you haven't had a chance to check out their visualization project in the room, they were gracious enough to come this morning and set that up. What it allows you to see is what you can see or not see from under different conditions, different weather conditions, cloudy days, clear days, with respect to the towers that would be installed. So this is a great opportunity for you to take advantage of that.
Madam Chairman? Madam Chairman?
Yes.
If I might.
Jennifer. Please, Jennifer. And you have some information, or some of you, they didn't have enough for everyone, but I think most people were able to get one. But we will have a link on our NC Towers website to the visualization study if you want to look more into that. Yes. A lot of information. Our website was just, it just went live last week, this week? It just went live this week, actually. And so we're still uploading information. You will have all of the information from today loaded on there, and we will add more information as it becomes available to us to keep you informed and to keep the public informed. Okay, before we wrap up, some housekeeping. Just want to make sure for the task force members who are here, please keep your receipts for reimbursement. We will be sending that information out for you. I do want to take this time to thank our staff. They have been really, really great in making sure that we came together with you with some information to encourage you and to know that your commitment is going to be matched by our commitment to making sure that we are doing all that we can do to advance North Carolina's offshore wind industry. Thank you. And so if you need anything from any of us, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our information will be on the website as well, but you already have our email, so you can reach out to us that way too. Again, thank you. We appreciate your time. One more thing on the agenda, it does show the dates for future meetings. Our next meeting, we're planning a 2-day event. We haven't nailed down the location yet, but that will be announced later, May 5th and 6th. Our third quarter meeting will be August 4th, and then the last meeting for this year will be November 3rd. As the subcommittees are formed, you'll decide as a subcommittee, whoever will be chairing that committee will find out the most convenient days for those committees to meet. And again, we know that we have to have some flexibility. We won't be able to meet in person all the time. We'll always have a virtual opportunity for members to participate so that we can be as inclusive as possible. North Carolina Commerce /NC Towers. North Carolina Commerce /NC Towers. That's our website. And I will mention, there may be a little confusion because there are actually 2 NC Towers. One is an educational group focused on education. I don't know how we got 2 acronyms exactly the same for 2 different interests. So if you go to our website, and I think they may have done the same thing, at least if we haven't, we'll have our communications team reach out to them. But if you wind up on the wrong NC Towers, we do have a link to the other NC Towers, and we hope that they have a link to ours. Right, but if you Google NC Towers Offshore Wind, you'll get to the right website. Again, I want to thank everyone, and I look forward to seeing you our next go round. Is there a motion to adjourn? We can, after we adjourn. There's a motion to adjourn to a group picture. Is there a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.